be repeating this session. So there's a Thursday class, a Friday class. And I'm maybe thinking about, I'll just do the Thursday class and record that just so it's consistent. And if everyone wants to go back, they get the same thing. If anyone has any thoughts on that, unless you want to be on the recording, I thought maybe it's good. And then on the Friday, there's a bit less pressure and you'll feel like you don't have to worry about being recorded. So I thought I might try it as a bit of an experiment to see if there's differences in the class for that as well.
Hi, Tony. I just thought that, I mean, it could be a good idea, but I just thought if you just switch them to the, Thursday recording, probably the Friday class students won't. I mean, the attendance rate will be, and like you can't encourage all people to like really watch the lecture recording, you know.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. So if you can see, I've got a little link to Kahoot up there. If you haven't played, you can just Google Kahoot. I want to do a little Kahoot just to see if you know anything about me. Don't panic about this one. I don't expect you to do too well. And what I will do, is anyone not played Kahoot? Yell out if you haven't, and we'll go through this a little bit. Who's? No? So yeah, have you got a web browser? Or
yes.
if you click on that link that I've sent, kahoot.it, that should work.
Yep, and it asks for a game pin.
Yep, so that's about to pop up. And I'm just going to share that screen with you now. So hopefully,
Okay.
Can you just see the Kahoot there?
Yep.
Yep. So the pin that you need to put in is 4896497. You don't have to use your real name. You can use an anonymous name. There are some filters on there.
Carter, stop please. Okay, it says I'm in.
Yep. So we'll wait till a few more people are in. So the idea is, I'm going to use this a little bit later on. So this is just to get you familiar with it.
Yep.
I use this from time to time when we do some little class quizzes just to see where you're at. The idea is you'll get a question, you'll get some multiple choice answers that pop up. You have to get the answer right. So there's actually different colors and different shapes that match the multiple choice. So when you're logged in, all you've got to do is click on the shape or the color that matches the right answer. You do get points for being fast though as well. So the faster you respond, the more points you get as well as being correct.
Thank you. Thank you.
So if anyone has watched Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the start, it's like that. What have we got? Does anyone need more time? Feel free, if you want to, feel free to mute your microphones if you need to as well. Like you don't have to have them on completely.
Excellent. I only got my timetable on Monday. Didn't leave me enough time to organise daycare.
All right. Yeah.
So I've got 2 little people this week.
Okay, no, that's good. Actually, I might even need you in a few weeks' time when we do developmental psychology. We might be able to do some online little experiments and tests to look at development.
We're always here.
All right, we all good? All right, nice quick quiz just to warm up. So hopefully you'll see these questions pop up. Let me know if you don't. So, first question, the name of this course. So this is a quick one. You don't get much time, only 4 seconds left. I want to see a little attention to detail here. Who jumped on the first one? Saw the name. It's close enough, right? APY 1009. This is where I do a little bit of psychological screening. All right, next question. Normally I have a bag of lollies and I give prizes to the people in this quiz. I'm not sure what I'm going to do now that we're online. Everyone got that one correct? The blue options usually I can check to see if I went to primary school with anyone. Occasionally I'll get a few people. Anyone being careful here? I got 4 people looking pretty good for high distinctions for the course.
Oh my gosh.
4 people are slightly at risk. Although, excuse you, maybe the beer's probably added 10 years onto me at the moment. Nice easy one, right? I'm very confident I know what probably 80% of you will say. Which is actually not the right answer. Oh no, a bit less than that. Yeah. Why would people do that? Again, this is a psychology course. You'd assume most people have no idea, right? So you're guessing why is more people, a lot more than anything, go for 2? Is there psychology behind that?
That's what's considered standard.
Standard, right? Yeah. So we're going to talk about lots of things in this course. And one of the things that I really want to do, and I'm going to focus on, I might as well just talk briefly about it now, but I'll talk about it a little bit later on, is you're all psychologists already. You've all had, some of you maybe 17, some of you a bit more than that, years of experience, you know, interacting, having emotions, thinking, behaving, doing all those sorts of things. A lot of what we think is simple processes involve a lot of really, really complex, processes in our brains as well. So one of the things I really want to focus on is just getting you to think a little bit more about things as well, questioning why we think things, why we react emotionally, why we behave in certain sorts of ways. In a lot of cases, we don't really think about that too much. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of brain processing, what we call heuristics and schemas that we use, even though we might think, oh, we're guessing something. A lot of that case, it's actually not. So yeah, I really want to draw, as I said. So please, 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 if you've got any questions, feel free to chip in. If you want to stop, anything that doesn't make sense, make sure you interrupt. I've got the chat going, so I do try to monitor that if I can. So if you've got any questions, anything like that, please, please do. Most of what we do is things that you have some intuitive understanding of, but hopefully the goal is I'm going to give it some more scientific labels. We're going to break down some of these concepts a little bit. But as I said, my focus on trying to uncover some of the processes when we actually make judgments and decisions like this. All right, another one for you. Five seconds. Oh, I always get people to go for that. I don't even know what that means. I just thought I'd make up sound really interesting. If you went yellow, one person, that was actually my honours thesis in psychology, was sleep deprivation, circadian rhythms, human performance. So I had first year people, sorry?
That's where I got it from, in your lecture online for before the class. I remember you talking about it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, sorry, dog was going off at home. Yeah, anyone that knows anyone, I had first year students like yourselves that actually went up to the lab for a whole weekend, went without sleep. I gave them this really hideous, complex cognitive task to do every hour, which I might tell you about later in the semester. But circadian rhythms, anyone heard of circadian rhythms? Biological body clocks. We have these 24-hour cycles as well. But yeah, my main area, my PhD topic was happiness, although that doesn't really sound academic enough, right? So I had to dress it up a little bit and call it subjective psychological well-being, make it sound a little bit more important and interesting. But yeah, that's one of my main areas of interest. So well-being, transpersonal psychology, looking at things. So all the sort of all the fuzzy stuff that a lot of people don't like. And in fact, there's a whole new field now, if you've read some of the textbook, on positive psychology. In my early days where I was sitting where you were, there wasn't such a thing as positive psychology. So I had lots of people tell me, oh, that's not worth studying, you know. Psychology should be about helping people that are psychologically distressed get better. My main interest was just about, what about just people in normal, you know, everyday, day-to-day lives? You know, how can we make those people's lives more meaningful as well? It came out of one of the perspectives we'll talk about today as well. So, all right, a couple more things. I need to know a few things about you too. So why are you, not me, but why are you here today? Oh, a bit of a mix. So I've got a few people on the psychology path. I think there's a few people here. I spoke to someone right at the start that are doing on the health sciences stream, which are also doing it. And I've got some physio people. Some people are interested in psychology. One of the things, as I said, not that I want to spend this time selling you on psychology, but a lot of people, and I can tell you that, you know, if you enroll the first course you undertake, so if this is your first kind of start of your university career, it's much more likely than not that you'll end up in a different career. The statistics say about 80% of people that start an undergraduate degree end up in a different career. One of the nice things about courses, and why I really like this course, is it doesn't matter where you end up. This is about trying to know a little bit more about yourself and understanding other people as well. It's pretty rare that you're going to have anything in society where you don't interact with people as well, even if it's just family and things like that. So hopefully, as I said, you'll develop some insights, some understanding. Hopefully we'll get you to think about and understand yourself and understand the world a little bit better as well. All right, but as I said, I'll try to get a bit of an idea where you're at. Here's an important one as well. Oh, sorry, there's two more, I think. Okay, well, we've got 5 anxious people, got some excited people, a couple of relaxed people. One of the things that I want to talk about particularly, and hopefully try to make you feel a little bit more comfortable in the first week, those 5 anxious people, even some of the people that might be excited, who's feeling a little bit overwhelmed after the first week?
Yeah, I am. Because I actually, I think you remember me because I've taken this subject in my last trimester, but I just thought it's a little bit too full on for me, and that's why I dropped it. So I retaken it this trimester.
All right. Nobody dropped this course before having a chat to me. I know some of you will feel that way, and then a lot of it, particularly with the online stuff, and there's so much information and emails and things like that. What I really want to try and do in this first week is just put you at ease. Don't panic about all that sort of stuff. As I said, everyone's here to help you. Particularly, I'm here to help you with this course. So if you're feeling a little bit worried, feeling a little bit overwhelmed, and I actually went back and tried to look through some of the links and the course, and I thought, gosh, it looks like so much stuff to do. I'm going to spend some time today giving you a little tour of the portal page, some of the key things to look at. But yeah, hang with me for this. I won't sugarcoat it. This course, there is a lot of content. I spent 12 years full-time as an academic psychologist at Griffith Uni. The way that I run this course is to try and line it up as closely as possible with Griffith. And in fact, we need to do that. So the conveners at Griffith, I used to be a convener of the courses here in the other way around, but we have to follow what the Griffith Uni does. So we get accreditation for the course, and you can go straight into second year in whatever health sciences or psychology or social work. Unfortunately, from probably my perspective, there is a lot of content. So there's a lot of people over there in psychology that think, oh, you need to know all these different things. Because a lot of what we do, you know, each week that we do sometimes is an entire course in second or third year psychology. So there's no doubt that this is quite a content heavy course. So I've done a few things, and this flip learning scenario that we're doing, I've used that to try and help you a little bit more, and I'll spend some time on this. But what I don't want you to do, and well, not that I don't want you to do, but you no doubt you'll get a lot of content and you'll feel a bit overwhelmed with and think, do I have to know all this? But I want to put you at ease. This is what our learning experience is 3 hours is for. If you are worried about that, I'm going to spend some time going through and saying, look, here's the really important things. So on that, I want to ask one more question. So we do have a few anxious people, which I just want to make sure I can identify a few of those people as we go through, but this is probably the last one, and I'll talk to this in a second. What sort of grade are you looking for? And by the way, this isn't, oh, if you're handing out a high distinction, I'll take one. That'll be nice. Thanks, Tony. This is sort of where you may be setting yourself. Bearing in mind, I understand that these, I won't hold you to these. They may change dramatically as we start getting through the course. Or gee, I shouldn't be wasting my time on Kahoot then, right? We've got lots of people that want distinctions and high distinctions. Like I said, my goal is to get you to where you need to be. As I said, I've got some goals apart from assessment about hopefully trying to get you to think about the world in a little bit more complex way, understand yourself a little bit more. But my other key goals, obviously, are assessment based. First of all, obviously, we need to pass. We've got someone here that's, I would suspect would be in the anxious category as well. If you just want to pass and you want to make sure you get through, absolutely, I can give you some tips and tricks and say, look, here's the stuff, make sure you focus on this. And there's a few important things you need to do to make sure that you pass. For the people that want to get high distinctions, I can definitely push you a little bit more and say, look, you know, if you really want to get the good grades, here's some of the extra things that you probably need to do to maximize your chance at that as well. But it looks like we've got a nice high achieving class. So I will talk a little bit about that as well. But as I said, I really rely on a bit of feedback from you as well for this. How we go? What if there's prizes for that? Oh, Josh knew me from before, I think. He had a bit of a leg up on some of those earlier questions maybe as well. All right, so just quickly, before we get back in, what I might do, how many people found the lectures? All right, I'll come through. How many people haven't watched the lecture yet? A few people?
I haven't.
Haven't? Okay, you get an excuse this week, but then I'm going to be a little bit more disappointed if you don't do it next week. First of all, can I just quickly, if I go to the chat, could you please type in your full name, and if you have a preferred name that's different, I can see a few other names on here. Just maybe put in brackets what your preferred name is for me. And usually what I do, some people, have you been in any of your classes? Do you mark the roll online? There might be times where I'll actually call out names and get people to respond just to see that you're still actually there and listening.
Actually, I thought the session is the lecture one because I thought you're only like recording yesterday's session just for us to review. But
oh, okay.
Yeah, and that's why I didn't watch the lecture. I intentionally didn't watch the lecture just to wait for the day.
Yeah, okay. We'll go through and have a look at it. But just a short story before we get into it while you're just typing names in. And as I said, I usually do that. I'll get you to type names into the chat and I'll use that to mark the roll because it's a nice, quick, easy way rather than sort of calling everyone's name out and taking an extra 5 minutes to do it. So is anyone not familiar? Hopefully you've done all this through orientation, my new students here, but the new format, or maybe even for the students that have been here in previous trimesters, with the learning content, the learning experiences and the learning activities. So the notion is learning content is, who's still confused with that? Anyone?
Yeah, I'm still a little confused, but yeah,
Yeah.
I every time I just click into every box and just see what's inside.
Yeah, me too a little bit. And you'll find that some of my slides will probably still have the words tutorial or workshop in it as well. But learning content is what you do before class. So these are things that you don't really need me to take you through. And as I said, there's quite a lot of content for this course. Our learning content, and I was a bit mixed on this because we've now got a 3-hour learning experiences class. The learning content is quite heavy for this course, and it involves basically watching a previous version of the lecture. Okay, so I was going to change it up. I know some of the courses you might just watch a 10-minute video, or there might be some basic sorts of things. So the reason I've done that is I don't want to have a 3-hour session with you in person where it's super, super full on and it's just packed and we're trying to fit as much information in as possible. So what I want to do is actually get you to, where are we? Get you to focus a little bit more on doing some of that work that you, as I said, you don't really need me to look at. And then what we're going to do, so basically instead of doing a 2-hour lecture in class, and I'll come through some of these things as well. Oh, by the way, I'll try and turn the editing off. It's a little bit difficult. My screen looks a bit different to yours. But I'll start with the weekly stuff and we'll come back and work back out to the edges. So yeah, I'll actually talk to you in a sec about the modules, but basically each week that you click on, we'll have a learning content tile, learning experiences, learning activities, evidence of learning. The only evidence of learning I have is links basically to assessment, but really that's just links. I've got everything to do with the assessment that's graded in an assessment tile later on. But for our course, the learning content involves a couple of things. Are you all okay now with the tabs and the table of contents on the right hand side with these books? If you're not, as I said, I can go through this a little bit later. I was going to make a video. I'm having trouble with the video settings of me just clicking on everything and basically saying what I'm saying now, but I'm recording this Zoom session anyway for it. So there's two things. So what I have now is my lecture capture, and it's based on a previous course. So as I said, instead of doing a 2-hour lecture in class, it's a bit edited through. So it's this one's only about 1 hour and 11 minutes, but most of them will be about 1.5 hours long. So that is something that I really hope you can watch beforehand. So that's something that's really important. So we'll come through, in this case, week 1 is just on introduction to psychology, but to go along with that, I've actually posted the PowerPoint slides. So they're not exactly the same slides, but basically they're the slides for that lecture that you can watch on YouTube as well. If you don't have time to watch that lecture entirely, at a minimum, I definitely want you to go through these lecture slides and have a look at it. That's a really, really important thing as well. But yeah, I'd strongly recommend doing it. The other thing that I put in here is I point out the chapters for the textbook. And by the way, does anyone not have the textbook? Sorry, I can't see people at the moment. Who actually has a copy? Who doesn't have a copy of the textbook?
Mine arrived last night.
Oh, there you go. Was that a hard copy?
Yeah.
Yeah. How long did it take?
I ordered it on Tuesday because I didn't get my courses until Monday night.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I'll show you that in the resources. I've got some links to that. And who hasn't got a textbook yet?
Me.
I haven't got one.
I don't have one.
Yeah. If you haven't, I'll help you out a little bit with that just for the first couple of weeks so you can get started on it. So here's the important thing. If anyone's had a look at these textbooks, they're very big chapters and there's lots and lots and lots of information in there. Okay, so if you've got the time and you're really interested in it, there's great information in the textbook. But usually what I'll do is a little summary and most weeks the point that I've got here is the main thing. You don't have to know the textbook chapters cover to cover. We jump around within that textbook quite a bit, so it's hard to say only read this page or this page because there's so many sections that I include or not include. So the bottom line for it, watch the lecture video and have a look at the slides and follow along. The slides just pop up during the video anyway. If it's not in my slides, it's pretty much no chance that you'll get assessed on it, with exceptions. There might be one or two things in there. But the key thing is the slides have the basics of information. When you watch the video of the lecture, apart from my boring monotone voice and a few dad jokes and things like that, I expand on some of those notes, and particularly keep in mind that I'm writing the assessment, I'm writing the exams. So when I talk off those slides, I'm talking about some of the things that are important for the assessment as well. So where the textbook comes in is you hear me talk about things in the lecture and you can see them on the slides. That's where you want to read in the textbook. So read the textbook selectively. As I said, if you've got more time, great. If you haven't, read the textbook selectively. So when I talk about a particular, like the psychodynamic perspective we're going to talk about today, people have looked at it, then read that section and try and get a little bit more detail, a bit more depth. Yeah. So just looking at it and reading that, looking at the slides, watching the lecture will give you some pretty good information, but you probably need that a little bit. If you wanted to, particularly those people that indicated they want a distinction or high distinction, reading the textbook will give you a bit more depth, a bit more conceptual understanding. That will definitely help you for the exams as well. So as I said, it is quite, a long thing. As I said, you might say, oh, the other class, they're only, watching a 10-minute video as they're learning content. The key thing for that, as I said, is I want to free up a little bit more time. So we don't have to pack as much into the class. As I said, you can do preparation. So some people might want to read things and take a bit longer. Some people, don't take as long to get that stuff. When I do a lecture in class, there's always people that say, oh, you went way too fast, slow down. There's people that are going, you're going way too slow. You need to speed up. It's getting boring. So the fact that you can do that at your own speed, you can stop and pause something if I say something. Maybe I should get prizes for that. If you actually, you hear me say something in lecture, you go, hang on, the textbook's different to that. If you want to point out any of my errors, you're more than welcome to. I'd like, that would be good. But basically you can stop it and go, oh, hang on, I want to read a little bit more around that. So the idea is you can do that. The other good thing is you could probably play me at 1.25 speed. 1.5, I talk a little bit too quickly. You probably won't get me, but you could play me at 1.25. I sound a bit more motivated and excited if you do that too, to get through that. So that's the key learning content. So there's quite a bit to do for that, but it doesn't mean I'm just leaving you to that and that's all there is. What we will do for maybe 30 minutes to an hour of our 3-hour learning experience sessions, I'll actually bring up these PowerPoint slides for us. And I'll do a couple of things. I'll say, first of all, were there anything in the slides in that learning content that anyone sort of was a little bit confused with, anything they weren't sure about, anything you want to talk about? And I can do that in the discussion forum on the website, if I'll show you in a sec, or just at the start of class, people might say, oh yeah, can you talk about this one a little bit more? So I'll basically go through those slides. It'll be a skim through. So I'm not going to go through every slide in detail, just and repeat the lecture. But I'll flick across to a few of the key slides, particularly the ones that I think are important for assessment, and say, okay, remember, hopefully you watch the video on this bit, here's some really important things, make sure you remember this stuff from that as well. So we're going to do, in a sense, an interactive sort of lecture summary, if you like, from that learning content.
Yeah, that will be great. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'm
so
gonna watch the lecture
it does, as I
live.
said, it does mean you do need to do a bit of preparation for this. But as I said, if nobody's watched those lectures or the slides, then it's not going to be a very good experience of me skipping through the slides. It's probably going to confuse you more than anything. So the idea is hopefully you've got a bit of content, and then we're going to just focus you a little bit more on what's key for the assessment. So that's one of the key things. So the other thing I want to do just quickly, and that they should be all up. So if you want to get ahead, you can do that as well. So one of our 3 hours will be on reviewing the lecture. The other 2 hours, and I debated on whether to do this or not, is on the material from the previous week's lecture. So what I thought I'd do, and we had to do this in the past because some people had tutes and workshops before the lecture. Some people had tutes and workshops after. So we had to kind of have the tutes and workshops a week behind the lecture because you couldn't actually come in and do a tute if you hadn't even done the lecture yet. I decided to keep it the same so that we could actually sort of, each topic that we cover is spread out over 2 weeks. So yeah, you try to get it in week 1. We'll do a little bit of review, but we'll do some extra experiences and activities in the following week just to maybe reinforce it. And there's some learning theory to back that up. You know, if you try to learn just one thing one week and then go into something else, it's better if you actually try and extend the learning out over a longer period of time as well. So just to go through that, I'll go through learning experiences. Actually, no, I'll do it now. So yeah, when we come to class, I've got a few notes here for you. So some of this is really just sort of just to make sure that you're kind of on track with what we're doing. I usually have an overview that says, okay, this is what we're going to do. So as I said, today we're going to go over all the things, all these parts of the module, and I'm going to give you a bit of a tour of the portal site and some important things to look at as well. Usually what will happen is in this learning experience workbook, I will have materials, but as I've noted here, I don't know if that works or not, most of the materials, which include any PowerPoint slides that I use during this 3 hours, I'll post up here, but I usually don't post it up till after class because, you know, a lot of the times we do some activities, but I don't want you to know the answers or I don't want you to know some of the things we're doing until afterwards. So I will post anything up. Some weeks we're going to do some practice worksheets. In 3 of the weeks, we're actually going to do some experiments. Our next week's topic is intelligence. So there's a lecture on that. How many people think they're intelligent? I'm going to find that out next week. Well, not really. We're going to do a cognitive ability assessment. So I'm going to give you some experience in the sorts of things that people do when they try to measure psychologically things like intelligence. All those sorts of things I'll post up here. I'll also, this Zoom recording, and as I said, maybe we'll just do the Thursday one so it's consistent and everyone's got one class to watch, but I will post up, I'll probably upload it to YouTube, but I'll post the Zoom recording. So I do have yesterday's one. So I'm just deciding whether I put 2 different classes up. I think if I do that, people might get confused and think they have to watch both. But there'll be a recording of the 3-hour sessions each week that'll pop up there as well. And
Yeah,
this
so
week,
you
I
mean,
was...
like, yeah,
Sorry,
like
Rama?
you mean our Friday class, like, only need to watch the pre-recorded lecture and that's it, and yeah?
Yeah,
what you
yeah. So
mean?
if you're in this 3 hours, you don't have to go, you know, you don't have to go back and watch it. But maybe if you're studying for exams, when I'm going over the lecture content and giving you some tips and things like that, it's probably worth maybe skipping back over this Zoom recording just to, you know, catch up. But the main thing is, yeah, if you miss this, you'll be okay. This is probably the best thing about being completely online now. The lectures, you know, have been recorded for quite a while, but these learning experiences, what we used to call workshops and tutorials, the fact that they're recorded now is really good. So yeah, you don't miss out on anything. Just to point out though, that I do stop the Zoom recording from time to time. If I show you things or there might be some videos or something like that. If we do any breakout rooms and small groups, you can't actually record that in Zoom as well. So it won't be a complete replacement for showing up, but at least if you miss class, you know, you should be able to come back and watch the learning experiences on this Zoom recording as well. Yeah. As I said, I was going to put a tour up. I haven't had that video up, but I will get that guided tour up in a second. Yeah. So I'll talk about that a little bit more, but yes, 3 weeks. So in week 2, week 7 and week 10, we're actually going to do sort of an in-class experiment. So as I said, next week, we're going to do some things on cognitive ability. And we're going to talk about some of the ways we try to measure and assess people's intelligence. In week 6, we're going to do a little survey on happiness. And you're going to fill out a survey. We're going to look at the data and we're going to do some analysis of that. And in week 10, we're going to do a little social psychology experiment where you work in groups and individually. The main thing we're doing with these pracs is usually we'll do the pracs in those weeks, and the following week I'm going to do the results and the statistics for you. But the idea of that is to kind of scaffold us towards one of the main assessment pieces, which I'll show you in a sec, which is a big 30% lab report as well. All right. So yeah, learning experiences, most of that stuff, you won't have a lot of information until you come to class, but anything we cover in class, slides, videos of the class, everything will be posted up in the learning experiences as well. The last thing, and this is where I've tried to sort of wait, some people have a lot of learning activities to do after class. Because the learning content, you know, watching that video for an hour and a half, reading through slides and some of the textbook takes a bit of time. My learning activities are actually a little bit less. And in fact, one of my learning activities probably could be a preparation, might be even the first thing that you look at. I've got a little just review in here just to say, okay, have you watched, you know, looked at the lecture, read some of the textbook stuff, looked at the slides, gone through our learning experiences, made a few notes, tried to make sense of some of the material as well. What I have done in part of the review process as well, has anyone used Crash Course before? At all for different things?
Yeah.
That was one of my fun things to do in the lockdown. You know, look at the Crash Course on classical literature or something really weird that I thought, oh, I've always been interested in that. If you go to YouTube and Google Crash Course, there's a whole huge amount of different learning areas there. The psychology one is great. I don't know if anyone's ever come across it before, but there's about 40 something videos that basically give you all the basics of first year psychology. It's way more interesting to listen to my lectures, and it's a nice little 10-minute cut down version. Don't use these to study for the exams, because there's a little bit of difference between what they say in this and what I say in with the textbook. But they're a nice little quick introduction. So if you're going, oh, what's all this stuff, particularly things about research and experimentation, that's a pretty tough one to get our heads around, which we're doing this week. If you watch that nice little 10 or 11 minute video, nice visuals and things like that. So they're completely optional, but I think they're not a bad little way just to get a bit of a feel for it. So if you kind of do these, they give you the basics, and then you can watch my lectures for a little bit more detail. Then you can read the textbook if you want even more detail to some of these things as well. Does that make sense? Yeah, I didn't want to put them in a learning content because I didn't want people to feel like they had to watch it and even add to the workload and to the high content load for that as well. I've got a little prepare section for it. Just a couple of things. As I said, because the learning experiences, or at least a couple of hours of what we do each week, will be on the previous week's lecture content. I've got a little bit of a prepare thing where I've said, you know, make some notes of anything you've got questions about. But I've got a few questions there. So who's watched the lecture? How many people watched the lecture?
I did.
Few people. If you did,
I
hopefully you might know a little bit about psychodynamic perspective or the behaviorist or cognitive. If you haven't watched this yet, it's going to be all foreign to you. But these are just, again, this is something where please, as I said, I don't want you, there's very little, as I said, activities to do after class. But what I want you to do is maybe just think about these things. So I don't expect you to have all these answers and go, oh, I've got all these answers to these questions in class. I want you to think them about a little bit, because these are some of the themes that we're going to focus on when we do the following week's activities. Yeah. And just to give you a little bit of a tip, seeing lots of people want to get distinctions and high distinctions. What I might do as well is some of these questions to think about might be very closely matched to the questions I might ask you about in the mid-semester, and particularly the final exam. Yeah. So if you're sort of going, oh, what do I need to know for exams? These will sort of give you a little bit of a hint as well. Okay. So the main thing I want you to do, once you've actually had a go at the learning, you know, you've gone to class, you've read the stuff and you seem to be pretty prepped, is, as we said, and you probably got this in orientation if you're new, evidence of learning, demonstrate evidence of learning. There's the big push now, you know, so how have you shown that you can demonstrate your learning and that you've met some of these learning goals? What I have, and this is what I've only added, so there might be some errors in this, I've added a quiz. So each of the week's contents there's a 20 question multiple choice quiz. So the mid-trimester and the final exam, there is a big chunk of multiple choice questions. Anyone here not a multiple choice fan at all? Multiple choice can sometimes be a bit hit and miss, you know, because that notion of sort of, particularly when there's sort of negative questions and things like that. But basically this quiz, they're all open now. Oh, actually, look at that. 9 people have already had a crack at it from yesterday. But basically, I've got this set up. You can do this multiple times. Yeah, there's no penalty for this, and you don't have to feel any pressure to do this at all. It's great for you because once you've watched the lecture, you've come to class, you've done a bit of preparation, it'll give you a sort of a bit of feedback about where you're at for the course. But importantly, it's really good for me too, because I can look at these quizzes, as I said, so this is, people are doing this, and it's great to do it this week because next week's learning activities, or 2 of the 3 hours anyway, we'll be doing on this week's content. When I look at the quizzes and I see what people get right, what people get wrong, that will give me a bit of direction about maybe what I should be focusing on with you the following week as well. And then maybe what you want to do is have another look at the quiz again as well. So this is, yeah, as I said, 20 questions. Just to point out too, and again, and by the way, if you think there's a question that's wrong, make sure you let me know, because there's every chance that something's messed up in it. Because I had to write about 500 questions over the last month and a half. The test questions, so this week 1 quiz, I think I have about 35 questions. So what you will get is a random sample of 20 questions. And from that random sample of 20 questions, as I said, that will come from that 35. So if you take the quiz and then you take it again, the questions will be randomized. Actually, the ABCDs will all be randomized as well. But you'll probably find there'll be some questions that'll be the same ones you got before, but some of the questions will be new. So who are my people that want high distinctions? You know, if you wanted high distinction, it might be a little bit boring, particularly some of the weeks I don't have a lot of extra questions above 20. But for some of the weeks, if you kept doing those quizzes, you'll find 1 or 2 questions will pop up on that. So here's another important bit for the assessment. Some of these multiple choice questions are good conceptual questions. They're good for learning the content that we're covering, but they might not be something that you're going to get a question that looks that much like that on the exam, but it still helps you learn the content and learn some of the things that you'll get asked about. Some of the questions will be very close. So the wording of the question, the style of the question, the options, the answers will be really, really similar to what you'll get on the mid-semester exam and the final exam. And if anyone knows me from previously, I think there might be 1 or 2 people repeating. Occasionally what I like to do is put a question from a practice exam directly on the actual exam itself. I usually don't put too many up, and it usually because it depresses me. So to give you an idea, last trimester in the mid-semester exam, we didn't have the weekly quizzes. This is only a new thing because I think people wanted to do more practice questions. But just before
that's true. Because I mean, especially for the new students, you won't be really familiarized with like how the exam will be like. So it's good to have weekly practices.
Yeah. So just before the mid, we did do a practice exam. Sorry.
Yeah. Like we've done the same in the lifespan development class, like in trimester 3. Like Greta has done like weekly questions with us as well, and I
weekly ones. Yeah. I can tell you that I put one in the practice exam we actually did it 2 days before the mid-semester. One of the questions that we did in the practice exam that everyone had the question and the answer to, I think only 58% of people got it right on the actual exam. And that was a question that was the exact same question, word for word. The options were exactly the same options, word for word, which was a bit of a worry. So as I said, this is something that obviously I'll try and monitor it. And if you actually haven't had a go at any of the quizzes or anything like that, you might get a concerned email from me saying, you know, how you going? I noticed that you didn't do the quizzes or something like that. I do want to try and make sure. I don't want to pester people, but these will be good. So as I said, yeah, some questions will be okay to learn. Some questions will be really good to practice. Some questions might actually be the exact same questions you get on the exam as well. So highly recommend, once you've done a bit of preparation, seeing how you go. You know, you could do it for yourself and go, oh, I'm just going to watch the lecture, look at the slides and read a bit of the textbook and just test myself on that before we even come to class. If you want to do that, that's okay. If you want to wait until we do the review in class and we do a bit more stuff and then have a go at it, that's okay too. But definitely have a go at those as well, as I said. So that's a really important thing as well. As I said, so that's pretty much where we're going. So how are we going? Can you hang with another 10 minutes? We'll have a break. Is that all right? I'll just start off a couple of things. Just really quickly. So yeah, I'll just show you if we can go back. This wasn't here before, but the begin here tile actually should work now. Apologies. I think a few people tried this before and it didn't work. This is really nothing that you can't get from other parts, but I thought I've got a little intro to the course. This is in another section of the course anyway. I've got some contact details here. What I used to look like before I went into lockdown and got lazy. A little bit about the course and how to approach the course, as we said before. The course structure is something that if you're just new, you've done this in O week, or you've got a lot of emails from Chris about this, about some of the learning content and experiences. So we've talked about that as well. And I've just got a little kind of starting point, as I said before, just pointing to some of the key tiles like the resources and assessment tiles and the learning tiles and all those sorts of things as well. So there's nothing super new in that to look at. But where are we? The main ones, as I said, just I'll go through these really quickly. We'll have a break and I'll go through the course outline with you. But yeah, timetable should be up. As I said, it's a bit weird. I've actually got this as an image that if you click on the image, it then opens the PDF with the working links in it. So just for us, that meeting link will be the same every week. That won't change. So once you've got that sorted, hopefully, I meant to do that. I think you can import like a calendar, was it ICT or something? There's a format, I think you can import it to your calendar so it pops up every week for you as well. So it's got a little bit of a thing to say, okay, before class, go to learning content. As I said, if you've missed this Friday class or you know you're going to be away or something like that, oh, look at that, it actually fixed it up. Yeah, do the, you can do the Thursday class. So yeah, if you want to go to the Thursday class, just maybe flick me an email and say, is it okay to come to the Thursday class this week? I'm happy for you to swap around, as I said, for those ones as well. Does anyone prefer Thursday? I think if you enrolled late,
yeah,
this is the one you got stuck into.
I would really love to prefer, because I much prefer live, for the lecture.
Yeah, well, remember, we're not doing a lecture as well. So what we do on the Thursday is exactly the same as what we do today. So the Thursday is not a lecture class and today's something different. The lecture now you watch online. So you watch an old recording of me. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Steve, the quiz. I'll show you the quiz in 2 secs. Yeah. So that's every week. As I said, I do have a consultation, like a personal Zoom room. Sometimes if I'm just working, I'll throw that on. So you can try me from time to time, but if you want to contact me, I'm around quite a bit. I've technically on Thursdays, I've got class time, but I usually, if you flick me an email, I can jump on earlier on the Friday morning before class, so before 9:30, or you can catch me after class as well. I have a class this afternoon starting at 1:30, but I've got an hour gap as well, so we can work that out. Just another couple of quick things before. That's all right. And I'll just show you this. So the teaching team is just me at the moment. Anyone interested in forensic psychology at all? Wendy Broxham, who's one of the downsides is the work's been sort of halved a little bit with all the online stuff because we don't do Gold Coast and Mount Gravatt separately. But Wendy was one of my tutors, who's like a forensic psychology, criminology and things like that. She was one of the teaching team people. I've got an email link, and you probably found that as well before. My phone number's here. So particularly if it's something, that you want to really, you know, a quicker response to, particularly when it comes around maybe exam time or you have computer problems or something like that, feel free to contact me, send me a text or something like that. As I said, you know, if I'm around, I'll answer it. So don't feel like worry about what times or when you should contact me for that as well. As I said, I've got a link to my Zoom room as well to have a look at. And actually, no, we might have a break now because I want to actually concentrate a little bit more. So we'll freshen up. What I do want to do, obviously, is I'll go through the assessment. I'll go through some of the extra resources on there. And if anyone's found it, there's a course outline on the right-hand side that will do as well. But let's have a break. I'll pause that recording. I'll start. Okay, so let's come back to our course. All right, screen back up now. Just let me know. I worked out if I like minimize the screen or if I swap from one monitor to the other, so I think something happens to the screen sharing that stops as well. All right, just a couple of quick things before we get in. So I do have an announcements page. So if there's anything important, I'll send you an announcement. And I think, did you got an email from me that had welcome to 1002?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, so I actually didn't
Yeah.
send you an email. The reason you got that email is if I put anything in the announcements, it should automatically send you an email. I think that's just what it's set up for by default for that one. So there's an announcement page here. The other thing, I've tried lots of things. We used to have a Facebook page for this, but after some of the Cambridge Analytica data scandals and some of the other stuff with Facebook now, people's dislike for it, I've actually completely disengaged from Facebook. I don't do that. We did some stuff with Microsoft Teams last trimester, if anyone's used that. But what I thought, just to keep everything together, is I've set up a discussion forum for us. I haven't got any posts yet, but hopefully it'll work. But basically, if you've got a question, you've got a comment, maybe you find something online about psychology that you want to share with it, I really want to encourage people to use this discussion forum. So I've just set up like a pin post here on a Q&A. So if anyone wants to post in here or just reply and say, you know, I'm having trouble finding this, or I can't see this, or maybe the link to something's broken, which is probably the more common one. I don't know if all my links are going to work. That just post a question in there and I'll try and monitor that and come back to it as well. What I also might do with that is, yeah, as I said, any other questions, anything you want to share, anything interesting you find. One of the things I love about this course is getting your perspective on psychology. It's a great thing. People have some amazing experiences, lots of things. People always find some really, really cool stuff on the internet, you know, videos or things that overlap with psychology, interesting things. So yeah, I'd love people to share that, as I said, for it as well. So yeah, that's at the top of the page just before all the tiles there. So please, please, please feel like you want to use it. If you want to ask a question, I've tried to set up, I was looking at this yesterday, there's an add-in that I can't get access to because I'm not the IT person, that you can actually make this anonymous. But at the moment, I wanted to set this up so you could post anonymously. I can't really do it at the moment, but I'm going to ask IT if I can, just so that people, like most people are pretty comfortable. You can't ask a silly question for this course anyway. But I thought if I make it anonymous, then maybe people would feel a bit freer to ask questions or comment or you know, or give me some constructive criticism or something like that. But I'm working on making that anonymous as well. So that's in here. All right, so a couple more tiles that I need to talk about. I'll go to the resources first. So the resources folder has some important information in there. First of all, it's got a little bit about the course readings. So textbook, I've got a lot of emails for this. I probably should have mentioned this in the email. 4th edition, 5th edition textbook are all fine. So there's plenty of ways you can look at this textbook as well. You can get an ebook for it as well. Or does anyone not have their S number yet? If you're maybe new, Sarah, someone, you should have got an email about getting your S number so you can log in through some of the Griffith things like the library.
I still don't have access to it currently, but I should in a few days. But I do have another university library that I can.
Oh, yeah. So you should have that, or sometimes by the time you realise you've got the email, it might have expired.
Yeah.
But I've got a link to it you can click on in the resources. So if you've got your S number for the Griffith sign-on, this will take you directly. Has anyone tried this way? To read.
Yeah, I've tried it. I've tried it yesterday because the actual book is super duper heavy. Like you won't want to like bring it outside. And I've tried to read it online, and it's pretty good.
Yeah. So basically, there's only 9 copies of the book. So if there's 10 people right before an exam trying to log on and read online, you won't get in that. I'm not sure how it works for you, but I think I had about 300 pages. You can actually print chapters off in PDF form if you need to as well. But yeah, that's not a bad option, particularly if you're doing health sciences maybe, or you're doing social work and you're only really doing this one course. If you're doing 1001 with me and you're on the psychology stream, we use this book again for the other course. So it's probably, worthwhile getting as well. But yeah, that's not a bad idea if you want to download some of these as well. Now, how well do we know each other? We're all good friends, right? I found in my files, I know there's a lot of people that have had trouble getting access to books. I found some, in my files, it called them chapter summaries for some of the first kind of 4 chapters that we look at for the course. I haven't had a look at them, but if you want to try those links to see if they give you some useful information about the textbook, then you're more than welcome to try those links. Just don't email me and tell me what you found in them, because as far as I know, they're just kind of summaries. If anyone's getting where I'm going with that, you'll click on them and you'll find out. I'm not a person that likes to mess around with copyright or anything like that. So this is me setting up some plausible deniability in case I get in trouble. So yeah, you might want to have a look at some of those summaries if you haven't got your textbook yet. Yeah, or if anyone has access to some of the other summaries and you want to send them to me, I could probably share those links as well. All right, so that's the course reading. Here's a really, really important one. APA report writing is a really important thing. So is anyone not doing academic skills? I think most of you have either done it or who's doing academic skills this trimester? Yes. We've got a couple of thumbs up, Ross. Yeah. APA is a really, really important thing, particularly for any report writing in psychology and broadly in any social sciences as well. So if the people, who are my people that wanted the high distinctions, if you want to get a high distinction, this is one of the things that you need to do is get familiar with APA 7. Okay, so when we do report writing, this is a really important thing. I'll show you the first piece of assessment in a second, and there's a little bit of APA in that, but I'm not too worried. There's a really nice website called Redbook that not as exciting as it sounds. It sounds like a more of an exciting name, something called Redbook, but redbook.org.au is a really nice website. It's got lots and lots of links to doing things. So for example, the first assignment, I'm not going to get you to do this in APA, but I do want you to do one APA thing, which is APA reference a journal article. So you can go to this and say, how do I get a reference list? You can click on this link. It's a journal article. How do I do that in APA format? Okay, I have to have the author's surname, then a comma, then an initial, full stop. If there's another initial, that one, comma, next author's surname. Then I put the year in brackets. Then I put the article title, then the journal title that I have to put in italics, capitalized, et cetera, so you can see there an example for that. So this is really, really important. More broadly, when you're doing a report, which is our main 30% report, it actually tells you very specifically, you know, what you put in each of those sections of the report. There's some really nice things about report writing, just structures, style of writing, tense, you know, making sure that you don't use first person, all those sorts of things as well. So this is a really, really nice website on APA. The more time you spend on this, guaranteed, this will help you get those little extra marks in that 30% assignment as well.
I think that's a really good, website for us to get to know more about AP7. And I actually, like, the guide that I normally use is from Curtin University, and that's a pretty concise guide as well. Like, if your guys wanted something like a really handy guide or something just to bring out and just for a quick look, I think the Curtin University one is a pretty good one, because when I actually started college since trimester 3 last year, and when I first find Greta, she has given me this guide, and I've been using that guide until now. I
There's
think
lots
that's
of different
really
guides.
Good one.
We'll talk about that as we get into the assignment a little bit more. And the last thing, which you've already probably found, I've got a direct link to Kahoot when we play our Kahoots. But the other thing that I use quite a bit is a technology called Socrative. So it's a web-based thing. You can actually get a Socrative app for it. And I've got a direct link. So this is one, unlike Kahoot, where you have to put a different pin in each time. We'll have a room for Socrative called 1002 PSYGC. The link will be here, or most weeks if we use that, I'll share the link with you and say, I'll jump into the Socrative room. We're going to do some activities. So I can set up some questions, collect some information. One of the things that's hard is we do some pracs. We collect data, which is very hard to do, obviously, online. So some of the things, what I'll do is I'll get you to do some work, and then I'll get you to type in your responses, your answers into Socrative as well. So we will use Socrative quite a bit in our learning experiences. So as I said, there's nothing too tricky to it. As I said, we can just set up some quizzes and some other bits and pieces as well. So that's some of the key stuff in the resources. And all right, so a couple of more important things to look at. So how are we going? I want to finish some time here. So the assessment tile is obviously very important. When you click on that, I've got a little learning summary. So the breakdown basically is, and there's one error in the course outline. It tells us that the mid-semester is worth 25%, where it should be 20%. Week 4, so our first actual assessment piece is worth 5%. This is the easiest 5% that you'll get. And I deliberately make it really easy for a couple of reasons. One is I don't want this to be really about trying to grade you. What I want to use this first assessment for is just to get a bit of a feel about where you're at with understanding some of the main things to do with research, you know, knowing about hypotheses and variables and some basic sorts of things like that. So this is something I'm going to give you a lot of help with. And at least if you have a go at this, you'll be fine with. The other reason is Griffith University students over there, we didn't have to do this. One of the things, particularly in psychological research, is postgrad students, staff like us, we all want participants to do research, whether we're running experiments or doing surveys as well. So for the Griffith students, part of their 1002 experience is they have to participate in 5 hours of research. So they log on and they might show up somewhere and they get a survey and they just fill out a survey, answer some questions. Or they might go into a computer lab and stuff flashes on the screen and they press a button when things flash on the screen if they're doing some sort of cognitive psychology thing. But they automatically get a 5% for participating. You can't force people to, to do research. So the alternative over there is to do this research analysis, which is basically picking a journal article out and answering some basic questions on it. I'll talk you through that in 2 secs as well. Just quickly, in end of week 6, we've got a mid-trimester examination. That examination at the end of week 6 is based on the first 5 weeks of content. So the other good bit of news, yes, we have a lot of content, but you don't need to do an exam, or you don't need to know the whole semester's content for an exam. The mid-semester exam worth 20%, it's basically 40 multiple choice questions on the first 5 weeks of lecture content. Then when you finish the mid, the final examination is only based on from week 7 through to 12. So we kind of break the course into 2 halves, which is good. So yeah, if you struggle with the stuff early on, don't panic. You'll get an exam that's worth much, much more at the end. So hopefully if you've got the hang of some of this stuff by the end, you'll do okay. Like I said, the main thing, and this is probably the big difference between people that get good grades, bad grades, pass and fail, is a 30% research report. So this is a full APA report following all that really tricky APA formatting. The good thing about that is a lot of what we do in our learning experiences will be about scaffolding your learning up and giving you some of the tools to do this 30% research report. The other thing that I do is I'm very, very happy to give people feedback for this as well. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't do much feedback, and why this is probably a big separator. How many people are in that situation? You go, oh, I've got an assignment due Monday, and you go, it's 2 days away. I better get stuck in and just do a big all-nighter to finish an assignment. This one's pretty tricky. It's not the sort of thing you can start and finish straight away. So this is a really, really important that we actually spend a bit of time on that. We'll actually design our own survey. You'll actually answer the survey questions and hopefully share the survey with your friends and family and get them to do it. So we're actually going to design the survey ourselves. We're going to collect the data. I'm going to do all the fun statistical analysis and just give you the results, but you'll be writing up your lab report based on what we do as well. So I'm going to get you thinking about that in a couple of weeks' time. Yeah. So that's all the details. So as you can see there in the table of contents, I've got information on each of those assessments. So the journal article, the mid-trimester is our second piece, our third piece, the research report, and the fourth piece is the final exam. So for example, if you go to the journal article, and again, this is part of the course outline that I'll show you in a sec. It gives you a little bit of an idea about what it's about. Both assignments will have a submission guidelines that give you some information about what it's about. And again, this is a pretty simple one. What we need to do is you get a journal article. The only APA that you need to do for it is basically write the reference out in that APA format that we talked about before, and then ask a few basic questions. So what was the research question? Did the researcher have any hypotheses? And if you've watched the lecture, hopefully that'll make a bit more sense, but we'll focus on this next week in the learning experiences as well. Were there variables? Were there independent, dependent variables? And again, if you haven't looked at chapter 2 or watched the lecture, this is not going to make as much sense. Who were the participants? Where did they come from? That's an important part of the methodology when we're trying to make conclusions and generalize the results. Did they find sorts of results? Any limitations as well? And I'll point this out now, and I'm going to say this for the next couple of weeks. When this is sometimes I've had people that have quit the course because they've looked at this journal article and gone, oh my God, I can't make any sense of this at all. But trust me, I'm going to help you step by step through this. As long as you've had a genuine attempt at trying to answer these questions, I'm not worried about what you get right and wrong. That's just to give me some feedback on what to focus on. It's more about just putting a bit of effort in to see if you can work your way through it. You don't pick any journal article. What you'll have is a list of 6 of them. So I've already got 6 of these. So if anyone's keen to start, I've got a bit of a spread. Some of these journals are what we call probably a lower tier publication. So some of these journal articles aren't very good. There's a lot of methodological issues. They're not sort of great science for it, but I thought I'd just pick a few things out. So if anyone's interested, as I said, one of my main areas, meditation and consciousness and things was one of my main study areas, but I've got a little study on mindfulness meditation, intrinsic motivation, depression and stress, if anyone's interested in that, psychological disorder sorts of things. Maslow, if you've watched the lecture, humanistic psychology. This one is a pretty, very, very ordinary one as far as the scientific research paper goes, but some things in there. If you're on the psych stream, you're doing statistics with me, there's actually a journal article on predicting success. Social media and heavy drinking, that wouldn't be relevant to any of you, would it? I don't think anyone has any experience in social media or heavy drinking. You could relate to that one, maybe. And there's a cute little study that talks about if I give chocolate to people and how much chocolate could that influence whether they tip people at restaurants as well. So again, you'll pick one of these things to have a look at. And like I said, if you click on a journal article, you'll read some of this stuff, particularly in the results section, and you'll see all these weird statistics, Cronbach alphas, Pearson's R. What I want you to do is not panic and go, oh, am I supposed to understand this completely? No, the key thing you need to do is try to get a bit of an idea about what's happening with those. And in fact, before this is due, I'll spend some spare time in our learning experiences just to go through this. Yeah. So please, please, please don't look at these articles and go, oh, I can't understand this, I'm going to fail the course. Yeah, I don't expect you to understand these, but hopefully you'll be able to get a bit of an idea about it, just and try and read around and start to just get some practice at being able to read some of the literature. And again, in the main assignment, the 30% assignment, you will have to go and look up some research, find some journal articles, and actually use those and reference those journal articles to sort of frame a bit of an argument for your theory. So this is more just giving me a bit of an idea about what sorts of things I need to focus on really for the 30% assignment. Yeah, as I said, if you've made a genuine attempt at this, particularly if you've asked me for some feedback, a big chunk of people just get, I've actually marked it out of 10. It's one of those weird things. It's worth 5%, but Turnitin only gives you whole marks. So I've marked it out of 10, so you can get a mark, you know, that includes 4.5, 3.5, 2.5, etc. But the majority of people, if they're putting a bit of effort in, will get 5 out of 5 for this. So it's a nice little bonus to start with. As I said, so if you want advice when you're looking at picking one of these articles, tell me as well. There is a submission link. So everything's self-contained. So everything about assignment 1 is in this, basically this page here. There's a submission link that you should be able to click on. And if anyone's used Turnitin before, you'll basically go in and you can drop and drag a Word doc. You can just put your answers to this assignment in here as well. Does that make sense?
Can we submit it like 3 times? Because I think this applies to quite a lot of
Oh, I'll have to check what the settings are for that. But I think you can, it's not like one submission. Yeah, so I think you can submit it.
Because sometimes I just want to check how much, I mean the percentage, to see if
for
I
plagiarism?
plagiarize a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. How many people have used Turnitin?
Yeah, I've used it before, and I normally submit at least twice to just check if the plagiarism rate is too high.
Yeah. Do me, can I, just while we're on that with Turnitin, thanks Rainbow. I'd love people to do me a favor. I'm a pretty easygoing person, but if you want to upset me, maybe you want to do this deliberately. If you want to upset me, put your document in Turnitin, and if it's too high in plagiarism, go and do that right-click synonym replacement stuff. That's one of the things. I don't get upset too easily, but that upsets me. It's like that. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. I probably shouldn't even talk about that. But people like go in and go, oh, I'll just change every 4th word to a different word using the thesaurus that's built into Word or something. In psychology, we use very specific terminology for things. So when you go in and try to replace words to make it not plagiarized, it always looks really, really horrible and jarring, and it stands out. So yeah, please, if you're doing that, put things in your own words. You need, and again, this is an academic skills thing rather than, I don't focus on this for my course, but please just paraphrase, put things in your own words. Yeah. I'd much rather have someone give me an answer that might be in broken English, if English is your second language and the grammar's not great, but at least I know that's your attempt to understand it, rather than someone that's sort of almost copied and pasted something and just tried to change words and make it look as though it's not been copied. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I would just say that, like, for everyone that is new to the APA, I think the first thing you should do is to try your best to to paraphrase your sentence to, like, don't even use a single word of that sentence, because it will it will sometimes like if you copy even like one word, it will be like 1% in the plagiarism already.
Yeah.
So it's best
Yeah.
if you can really like read through it and understand it and just rephrase it from your own words.
Yeah.
And yeah, just not copying every single word of the sentence.
Yeah, and don't panic about the plagiarism stuff. I've used these articles before, so you might find that you'll get a lot of overlap with these. So don't automatically think if it comes up that it's going to be a big issue. I'll talk to you about that a little bit later on. Okay, so other things that the 30% assignment I don't need to worry about just yet. Well, that's down the road a little bit. That's due in week 11. Same thing though. I've got information. I think I've got a link to that red book. I've got a submission link in there. I've got a marking criteria as well. That's not due for a couple of months, but that's something that I'll talk about a little bit later as well. But what I do want to focus on, which is something we can already start preparing for, is the mid-trimester exam. So basically the way the mid-trimester exam will work, it will be a 40 multiple choice question, evenly spread amongst the first 5 weeks of class. So there's usually about 7 or 8 questions on each of the week's topics, which is probably not a lot of questions based on how much you do for that as well. But again, what will happen is there's actually a Zoom link. So when you do the mid-trimester exam, you'll click on the Zoom link and everyone will have cams on. That's the only time I'll be adamant to put your cameras on. Cameras on and microphones on initially, but we'll switch them off during the exam so I can actually watch you. Then there'll be a link. So if you're doing the practice quizzes that I pointed out before in the learning activities, it'll be pretty much the same way that you do the practice quizzes, except it won't open until a specific time. It'll close after a specific time and you'll have to do it on Zoom, and I'll be able to watch you and observe you sort of sitting the exam yourself. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that, as I said, that's on the first 5 weeks. So the other thing I did, there's a little sub-chapter in this assessment tile, and I've done this for the final as well, is those weekly activities, those weekly quizzes, are still in the learning activities and you can access them there. But I thought just to make it easy for everybody when you're studying, I've got the links to them all just side by side here as well. So if you're preparing for that exam, yes, I can go to week 1, if this works. I can go to my learning activities, show learning, and click on the list, the link for the quiz. Did I restart? Can anyone see a recording on this thing? I think I restarted, didn't I? Yeah, or as I said, in the assessment folder, you can go to those links here and it's just got all those, the first 5 weeks, it's just all there side by side. So if you want to just go through and practice those, like I said.
So you've uploaded all the first 5 weeks already?
Yeah, so this is the exact same link that's in the learning activities for each of those first 5 weeks. But I just put them all onto just one page just to make it a bit easier when you're prepping for the exam. And I've done the same thing for the final exam as well. Yeah. Don't stress about that too much. We can have a play around with that before. So that's kind of the key things to look at. But just quickly, what I will do is give you a little rundown. If you've watched the lecture, I think maybe I didn't include that in the lecture. On the right-hand side, there should be a link to academic calendar. That I don't know if that link actually works, but the course outline is in here. How many people had a look at the course outline?
Yeah,
this is worth looking at again. So
really,
this is
really helpful.
Most of this, a lot of this important course outline information, like things about assessment, I've moved into the assessment folders. So what you find in those tiles is here, but this is the summary of the course. Just quickly, yeah, we've got some learning outcomes. So these are the key things. Hopefully by the end of this course, you understand a little bit about the foundational themes and theories in psychological research. You understand, and basically these map onto 4 modules that we have for this course. Knowledge and understanding of personality and developmental theory, communicating research. So the assignment's a big process of this. We're going to look at some topics on psychological well-being, and yeah, being able to critically analyze and be able to apply skills to theories as well. So being able to, you know, read a journal article or, you know, look at someone's explanation and be able to evaluate that in a little bit more of a scientific way as well. It's got links, as I said, to the textbooks and readings and, you know, that red book page for APA, all those other sorts of things as well. There's generic things in here about the digital library and IT and all that. That's on every course outline, has pretty much the exact same stuff for it. But the nice thing about this is it does have a summary of our learning content, activities and experiences. So obviously you can go through the week 1 tile and click on those different sections. But this gives you a nice overview of kind of what we're doing throughout the semester. So as I said, basically our first module, the first couple of weeks is a module where we took, it's called Psychology Foundations. So we're basically just looking at where did psychology come from? How did it start? What's the history of psychology? You know, knowing a little bit about that. And then some key things on how we do research in psychology and how we try to measure variables in psychology. So that kind of covers the first couple of weeks. And again, it talks about some of the things that we do for that. Then in week 3, we're moving on to what we call psychology in the self. So we're looking at what we call personality and developmental psychology. So, you know,
that's the best part.
What makes you you? Why are you such a unique and special person? Well, that's what personality examines. Were you born that way? Were you your personality as a baby the same? Were you like basically a cut down version of yourself when you were 2 years old? Or were you similar? Well, that's what we explore in developmental psychology. And we spend 2 weeks on this. So particularly for some of the social work people, this is an important area. You know, how do we develop? Physical is a pretty straightforward one that a lot of people are familiar with. But how does our thinking, how does what we call our cognition change across time? You know, do the way 3 and 4-year-olds think about the world, their memories, their experiences, is that kind of pretty similar to us, or is it very different? And also particularly how we interact, our social skills, our social development. So we're going to spend a couple of weeks on that. And once we get through that second module, that's when we'll have that mid-trimester exam. So the good thing is, because we're sort of overlapping the content with the week later. So yeah, when we do physical and cognitive development in the lecture content, we'll talk about the learning activities, you know, the following week. So for week 6, we're not doing any new material. We're just going back over, reinforcing the previous week and all the weeks before and just getting preparation for the exam. So we do, you know, hopefully this is, you know, although there's a lot of content, we're going to sort of focus on the important things for it. Then we start with our third module, which is individual psychology and well-being. So we're going to look at topics about motivation, you know, what makes us get out of bed in the morning, emotions, positive, negative emotions, health psychology, broadly speaking. So we're going to talk about health, stress, coping, some of those things. Unfortunately, most people, when they think they're doing psychology, probably think about psychological disorders. And in fact, that's only 1 week of the course, which I'd love to spend more time on that because that's a lot of people are interested in. But mental health, we're going to spend 1 week on. If you go into second year psychology, you do, you know, a whole semester on what we cover in 1 week. So we only just broadly touch on that as well. And then the last 2 weeks, we focus on what we call social psychology. So we're going to talk about some important social psychology topics. There's some really, really interesting stuff in that. Is anyone doing interpersonal skills?
Yeah, I've done it
at
the
all?
last
Or done it
trimester.
doing it with Amy? Yeah, interpersonal skills sort of overlaps a little bit of that as well. And then as we said, so from that week 7 on, from module 3, our final exam worth 45% is only going to be based on that last 2 modules. Yeah, so you don't have to, when you get into that final exam worth 45%, remember everything for this trimester. You've just got to remember everything that we cover after the mid-trimester exam, if that makes sense. Yeah. And again, most of this stuff, as I said, is all in there. Anyone got any questions or comments on that? There's some things. Oh, we got another baby.
We're just saying hi.
Hello.
This one isn't mine, it's my partner's sister's, but I thought sorry to interrupt.
There you go.
That's okay.
Week 4, perfect age for object permanence. We'll
Yeah.
determine,
Attachment,
yeah, which stage. They in the sensory motor stage or the pre-operational stage of cognitive development? We'll find that out maybe.
Yeah.
Bring her along. Yeah,
Like,
any other questions, comments on that? Anything worried, anyone worried about? Actually, what I might do just really quickly, just now that I've covered that, can I get you to type in your name again, just to do a quick roll? Don't watch that video if you can.
Why so?
Someone said I should have a script for it, and that was a very good idea because I just like went, oh, I'll try and record me saying something about the introduction to it. Do people have a sense now that they've kind of got a little bit of perspective on the course and what's expected, what's required to do?
Yeah, much better.
Yeah, if you're not, as I said, like, don't get overwhelmed with it. And please, if you do start feeling overwhelmed and you think like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to go, the content's heavy, please don't disappear on me like some people do. Have a chat to me first. Let me know where you're at. Let me know how you're feeling with it. And hopefully we'll be able to work things out. This is a course, as I said, that because people, you look at those really heavy textbook chapters, there's a lot of terminology. Yeah, some people can get overwhelmed with this, but trust me, if you're prepared to put some work in, you'll do really well for this course. As I said, even if you're not good at multiple choice, if you sort of go, oh, I don't have a really good memory when it comes to learning those sorts of things as well. There's lots of ways and means around that as well. So yeah, please just hang with me. And I guarantee that I'll get you through if you're prepared to do a bit of work. Actually, that's one of the really cool things with Zoom is particularly for assignments, I've found that good. So before, people might email me assignments and you can sort of try and give some feedback to it. Now the good thing is I can catch up with you in a Zoom meeting. You can actually share your Word document and I can actually go through and say, is it okay if I have a look through it? And actually I can scroll through it and type on your Word document on your computer, make some comments, highlight some things, make some notes for you. I found that really, really good last trimester. The only downside is there was a lot of people that didn't do well on the assignment that didn't send me a draft. Some people got a bit worried and thought, oh, Tony's been banging on for weeks about getting this assignment started and I haven't, so I better not talk to him. As I said, yeah, I'm happy for people even to say, look, I don't even know where to start at this assignment. I don't know what to do. That's what I'm here for. So please, I want to really encourage you to feel like you can approach me about anything, asking any questions as well. That's really important. As I said, all I want to do is make sure that you get to where you need to be for this. All right. No other questions on the assessment folders, Tiles? All right. What we might do and what we'd normally do at the start of our 3 hours, we'll have a break for 5 minutes. We'll come back. And then what I might do is we'll go have a quick look through the learning content from this week. So we'll have a look at that week 1 lecture. We'll have a quick chat about some of the important things. Yeah. Can I just get an idea? Have you watched the lecture or looked at the slides? Can you just put a little yes or no in the chat? I did have a poll. Let's see if I can work it.
I don't know how to explain because I really paid attention to from the last trimester for the first week, and I've actually flipped through the slides like before this session begins. So I think pretty much a yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't know. My polls disappeared on me that I had. Yeah, but for Ali and Britt, I did have an option in my poll that said I kind of did. Kind of's better than nothing. So, and like I said, maybe if you say, no, I've done no work, Tony, you might get my disappointing parent look or something like that. But as I said, yeah, be honest with me. If you haven't looked at it, let me know. So at least I know kind of, you know, what I'm working with, where we're at, what we need to do. You know, a lot of life priorities as well. So like I said, I'm usually pretty sensitive to that. I'm not one of those lecturers that's, you know, right, you have to have this, that's it, no excuses. No, sorry, I got an apology for it. There you go. Maybe I can work on that. As I said, if I start to look really sad and disappointed, maybe I'll start crying if you haven't read the lecture. And you'll feel really bad, right? And you go, oh, I don't want to disappoint Tony. I better get this reading done. Yeah, just to emphasize that, don't feel like you have to read the textbook chapters cover to cover. Like I said, use the lecture slides and what I talk about and what I focus on in the lectures when you watch them to guide what you focus on. That's a really important thing as well. All right, we'll have a 5-minute break. I'll just pause the lecture capture for a sec. Cut down version. As I said, and I know obviously a lot of people, where are we? I'll try and keep an eye on the chats here a little bit. There might be a lot of people that haven't had a look at the lecture yet, but basically I'll give you a little bit of a cut down version of what we're doing. Can you see my PowerPoint slides? Or has that not come up yet?
Yeah, I can see them and I've printed them out already.
Yeah, I'll just maximize that for 2 seconds. Yeah. So is that up now, the PowerPoint?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right. So yeah, as I said, we're going to talk a little bit. So this, as I said, if you haven't watched the lecture, go back and watch the lecture, look at the slides. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I'm going to skip over a lot of this stuff before that we talked about already. Well, one thing maybe I'll say with this slide is the least exciting stuff is in the first couple of weeks. So we talk about research methods and design and some of the things. So yeah, if you think it's a bit too boring, give me a chance. Hopefully later on we talk about much more interesting stuff, as I said before, as we go through. But yeah, that was our little breakdown. I think our mid-sem break, or mid-tri break, is between week 7 and 8. I think it's at the end of week 7. We have an extra week off as well for it. But like I said, you've got a lot of experience in psychology. Hopefully what we'll do is sort of clarify some of your experiences. We'll learn some concepts that have some really important applications to understanding yourself and other people a little bit as well. So hopefully I'll be able to get you thinking a little bit more. And as I said, that's one of my big things. Too many people these days don't think. We don't value, you know, critically evaluating things, thinking about the world at a deeper level. So hopefully that will be something that we'll focus on a little bit before. You're all good people, right? I'll come back and talk about some of that stuff as well. But all right. So first things first, and particularly for the people that haven't looked at the lecture, what is psychology about?
I remember that ABC stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I always say to people when you're doing psychology that someone will go, oh, you're studying psychology. Oh, what's all that about? Yeah. And then you have to go and you got to have a nice little concise answer for them. So what do you tell people when they say, oh, what's psychology about? Yeah. If you look at the textbook, scientific investigation of mental processes and behavior. So there's a few key things for it as well. And by the way, if anyone's interested in improving the feng shui in their kitchen or realigning their chakras, I don't actually cover that. That's not part of our scientific psychology. which is not to say that you can't study those things scientifically. It's just that's not one of our focuses for the course as well. So key things in the definition, yeah, it's the scientific study. It involves both mental processes, internal things that are hard to observe, as well as behaviors, things that we can see people doing as well. And really importantly, it's about the interrelationship between those. So if you watch my lecture, what I like to do is simplify it to our ABCs. So it's the scientific study of the A for affect, so feelings of sadness, feelings of joy, and all those emotions in between. Our cognition is our C, so our thinking, which includes beliefs and thoughts, but our perceptions, our memories, mental processes, what we think, how we think those things as well. But also, yeah, the one that people focus on a little bit, how we interact in the world, how we behave, or maybe how we intend to behave. But we know that there's a really complex relationship between those. And we're going to talk about some of this during the trimester. You know, emotions affect our behavior and thoughts. Our thoughts also, you know, by changing our thoughts, we might change our emotions or our behaviors as well. So there's a really nice complex interaction between all those things as well to look at, as I said. So it's really about trying to scientifically understand the way people think, feel, and behave. Psychology as a science focuses on a few key things. So the first thing that we want to do as a science is be able to describe something. Basically, isn't that interesting that people tend to do this, or people tend to do this, they think something, or they, you know, people get emotional about something. So we want to describe some part of our psychology, our thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. Then hopefully where we come in is we look at theories. Well, why, you know, does somebody behave in that way? Why do people think and feel certain ways? And then hopefully by testing those theories and trying to get an explanation and understanding, we can then use that understanding to hypothesize, to predict, well, if those theories are correct, our explanations or understanding of psychology, then we'd predict in this particular situation, this is how someone would behave. Does that make sense? And I use the example just to quickly go through it. I don't want to redo the lecture because I'm going to run out of time for that. I use an example. Who's been around road rage at all? Yeah. So you've looked at somebody cut somebody off, and you'll see someone absolutely go nuts. You know, how does that person get there? How many people have seen someone do something really ridiculous, aggressive, been witness to that? Anyone had any experiences?
I think it's chasing toilet papers, I guess.
It fights over toilet paper at the shops. Yeah, that's probably a good example of those sorts of things. Yeah. You see that stuff, right? And it's good clickbait for all the news media, right? You see all these people just behaving in, you know, crazy ways. And most people shrug their shoulders and go, you know, is that person nuts? What's going on there? Well, as a psychologist, that's what we want to start doing, is trying to say, well, why is that? You know, why does somebody get road rage? Why would somebody get in a fist fight over a roll of toilet paper? Yeah. Anyone got some explanations from your experience?
Because people are really panic about the virus, but actually it makes no sense, like between the toilet papers and the virus.
So there might be an external situational factor there, you know, virus that then relates to some of the emotional component. People get very fearful, very anxious. So maybe they're really normally nice people, but that fear and that anxiety then, you know, interacts with their behavior and changes their behavior. You know,
It could be
people that do that, but
vulnerable.
aren't they they're just horrible people, right? People that do that, are they just, they're always that way? They were probably terrible kids too. They were probably born that way. Is that a possibility?
No, you can't really determine that, can you?
No, and as I said, this is the complexity of it, but maybe is there an element of that?
Yeah.
Is it possible that just, you know, people just were born with an innate disposition to, you know, not be a happy person, to be always aggressive? Yeah. Yeah. Has anyone cut someone off in traffic? Are you a horrible person? If someone cuts us off, what, you know, we tend to get upset with them. If we do that, what do we normally do?
Justify our behavior in some regard.
Yeah, we justify it, right? Oh, they were too close. They didn't give us room. Yeah.
I had a guy abuse me one time, and I literally followed him home and made him apologize to me.
Sorry, say that again, Josh.
I had a guy get really mad at me one day, and I just followed him home and made him apologize to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow, you're braver than me. I don't think that's not something I'd probably do. How did it go?
That's one way to deal with it.
Well, his wife came outside first, and then I said, all I want is an apology. And then he came out and apologized.
Wow, yeah. And as I said, there's a lot of things of that. Do people do that? If you're at the shops and you're standing in line, would you just push in front of someone?
That's
Yeah.
so rude, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's a notion, there's some psychology behind being in a car. You're in this sort of anonymous shell, so you're less identifiable. It's not necessarily you. So people sometimes, not that I'll probably be guilty of this too, of your behavior is quite different if you're driving on the road in a car than if you're out in public where you're more easily identifiable as well. So these are the sorts of things, right? So psychology tries to explain this from a whole range of, so yeah, maybe they're a bad person. Maybe the person that Josh, that yelled at you is just the nicest person on earth, but they just lost their job. They've had just a whole heap of circumstances and they just had a horrible day. That it's just one of the few times they ever lash out. We don't know that stuff, right? But that's the sort of thing that we want to try and explain. So how does psychology do this? And again, hopefully by the end of the course, you'll be good at explaining this. But this is the focus. And again, I'm not going to skip over this. I'm going to go over these slides on just where you'll end up in psychology. You can look at the lecture slides on that. And I'm not going to ask much on assessment on that. But psychology basically tries to explain it. And there's no one answer. Nobody thinks they've got the right answer. So psychology, there's not one paradigm. There's not one explanation of the way we think, feel, and behave. And in fact, the history of psychology has been one of these sort of pendulum swings of different schools of thought, different perspectives, different views about what makes us think, feel, and behave in certain ways. So one of the things that you need to do, if you haven't had a look at these slides as well, is go back and have a look at what we call these perspectives. And if you go through the slides, I've done this in chronological order. So a bit more than 120 years ago, psychology, as we know it as psychology, was formed. As we said, this isn't something that's sort of suddenly popped up. People have been interested in psychological concepts for a long period of time as well. But this was when we sort of knew psychology as a separate science as well. The first perspective, psychodynamic perspective. Who's heard of Sigmund Freud? Or who heard of Sigmund Freud before you looked at the slides, if you already watched at them?
Yeah,
Probably the most famous psychologist,
yeah.
that lay person's idea. Tell me about your mother, So Sigmund Freud basically, and the psychodynamic theorists, and I should say too, and I might ask you about this in exams, to try and understand these views of the world, these perspectives, they have usually a metaphor, and the metaphor we use to understand the psychodynamic perspective, we liken the mind to an iceberg. So not a lot of people know probably too much about icebergs, but one of the things when we see an iceberg, what we're seeing is usually only a very, very small part of that iceberg. The majority of what the iceberg is below the surface. So the metaphor for that, and the key part of Freudian theory, the psychodynamic theory, is that most of what drives us, what makes us think, feel, and behave in all those ways, what makes us us, and we're going to spend some more time on this perspective in personality theory, it's all unconscious. So we're actually not aware. We think we're making a rational decision, but this is actually a very deterministic perspective. In other words, there's not a lot of free will. The reason that we behave and think and feel in certain ways is really because of these unconscious experiences, these motivations. And a lot of them are created in childhood. And particularly for Freud, his focus was sexual and aggressive urges. Yeah. How many people have had this thought? They get upset and go, I'd love to punch this person in the throat. Yeah. Or they might have, sexual urges towards people. Freud said, well, it's not on the surface. So if I ask you what you're doing, you don't tell me that. But those unconscious, particularly sexual and aggressive motivations. So yeah, the psychodynamic theory would say the road rage is really, everyone has those urges. Everyone has it in them, this unconscious urge to, run someone off the road or get aggressive or do all those sorts of things. but most of us actually sort of filter that out. And I think I said it in the lecture, people might, for the lecture capture, I think I asked in the lecture, was there any smokers? Is that right? Anyone that bites their nails or smokes, Freud would say maybe you had an oral fixation, you had problems breastfeeding as a baby. That created an oral fixation at a psychosexual stage of development that manifested later in life in some of those behaviors. You can have a lot of fun with it, as I said, but there's a really important bit to psychodynamic theory, and that is, yeah, a lot of what motivates us isn't something that we're actually aware of. From that, the behavioral perspective, and this was sometimes known as rat psychology or stimulus response psychology, from about 1913 to the 40s, yeah, behaviorism said, look, we can't really, emotions, you know, and cognitions are internal states. We can't really measure them scientifically. So psychology should really be about observable behavior. So behavioral perspective just focused on the B's of the ABCs of psychology, just the behavior itself. The metaphor was this mind is like a black box. We don't really know what's going on. And if I try to ask you, I'm not going to really get a good story anyway. So the focus was really on observable behavior, as I said. So that was a very dominant perspective up until about the 40s and 50s. The third perspective was the cognitive perspective, which basically said, well, no, the behaviorists have got it wrong. We can't just focus on overt behavior. We need to know what's going on in people's minds. So the metaphor the cognitive psychology people use was this notion of the mind's like a computer. You know, we have input into the computer. So something, a stimulus, we see things, hear things, we experience things in the world. Behaviorists would say, well, we just respond blindly to it. But the cognitive psychologist said, well, it's not about just input output. It's the software we run, the way we process information has a big effect on our psychology as well. So that was the key sort of metaphor for it as well. You know, I think I used in the lecture the example that, you know, I can, yes, use behavioral theory and say, well, if I put a bit of cheese at the end of a maze, the rat will probably run the maze earlier, but it doesn't mean that will apply irrespective. The cognitive psychologist might say, well, if the rat's had a lot of food to eat, it's satiated, it's probably not going to have the same internal cognitive motivation if it's already full to get more cheese. So that would influence its behavior as well. So the cognitive psychology is important. That's usually combined, if anyone's heard of cognitive behavioral therapy that psychologists use, that's a very common one, that CBT. It's a combination of trying to change behavioral habits as well as your cognitions, your thoughts, as a mental health perspective. The humanistic perspective, and to admit my bias, this is kind of where my heart lies in the humanistic theory. They basically said, well, all of those things are very deterministic in the sense that, you know, well, are we just slaves to our unconscious drives, or we just blindly respond, you know, like a rat that to stimuli? We have no sort of free will. We have no sense of ourselves. The humanistic perspective, basically, and Abe Maslow is one of my heroes, but Carl Rogers has written some stuff too, said, you know, we're looking at people as these series of behaviors or thoughts, you know, or unconscious motivations. We need to treat people as a whole person. You know, generally speaking, people are really good people. You know, so this perspective emphasizes personal growth and fulfillment. They use terms like self-actualization. And in fact, this was the foundation of what didn't exist when I was actually studying, was positive psychology. As I said, my focus wasn't about getting clinical populations, people that were having psychological distress, back to normal. My focus is how to just people that just having, you know, not major problems, how do they live more meaningful lives? How do they get a better sense of well-being as well? So this was sort of a bit of a reaction. The other perspective, and I focus on this for the psychology people, if you do 1001 with me, is on the biological perspective. So this is, again, a little bit deterministic. There's not a lot of free will. But basically, and again, these aren't psychologists. Charles Darwin, if you look at lecture, Theory of Evolution, is basically, they've provided some input. Anything we do, we think we've got all this free will, but it's really about chemical and electrical activity in the brain. Phineas Gage, if you look at the lecture, is a very interesting person. This is somebody that steel bar he's holding, he was working on a railroad, tamping down the railroad sleepers. That steel bar actually went through his chin, out through the top of his head, and went about 10 feet in the air. He didn't lose consciousness. He felt a little bit unsteady. So they thought he'd better go and see a doctor. The doctor didn't believe what happened until a part of his brain actually fell out on the floor of the doctor's waiting room. He lost pretty much the whole front part of his brain, what we now would call the frontal cortex. His function was fine, his motor function, he looked like a normal person, but his personality changed completely. His ability to make judgments and decisions changed completely. And from things like this, and over the years, you know, psychologists worked out, well, there's certain parts of the brain associated with certain aspects of our psychology, our emotions. So there's emotion centers, there's judgment, there's thinking, and all those other sorts of things as well. So the biological perspective is a really, really interesting one as well, that basically says, yeah, anything, you know, our thoughts, our feelings really are all about just physical, biological processes going on in our brain as well. Yeah. But is it just about biology? Yeah, so that was the idea. So which of those perspectives is right? Anyone got any thoughts on that? And to go back over that to that rage road. So yeah, the psychoanalytic theory would say, oh, it's obviously it's just everyone has those unconscious urges. They just acted on it rather than filtered it. Socially, the behaviorists would say, well, there's got to be some payoff. People that act aggressive, there's some reward, and maybe it makes them psychologically feel good about themselves, you know, and that then makes them more likely to repeat it because it makes them feel good again. The humanistic would be saying there's some sort of incongruence between, you know, that ideal person they want to be and life situations. You know, the biological perspective would say maybe there's some chemical imbalance in the brain there. So there's actually something, you know, biologically that's changed the way that they behave, increase their aggression. And there's some brain centers that do that as well. Yeah. Which of those is correct? Well, there's not 100% truth in all of those. None of them 100% false. But what they do is give us some different perspectives. And I talk about this in the lecture. I think if you go back and listen, this notion of, I think I use the phrase, you know, if everything, if all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. These perspectives, in a sense, are our psychological toolbox. Yes, if you've got a nail, a hammer works really, really well. But if I want to cut a bit of wood in half, will a hammer work? Maybe it would. It'd be pretty messy, right? But maybe I can, you know, hammer this thing until the wood splits. A saw would be a much more effective tool. So depending on the type of psychological issue, whether it's an emotional thing, a cognitive thing, whether it's a behavioral thing, all these perspectives offer a slightly different perspective and a different explanation or understanding about our human psychology. So the nice thing about learning these perspectives, and yes, some people are sort of more in one than the other, but they give us a bit of a broader way of understanding. Does that make sense? So when you're judging something like, yeah, why would somebody fight over a roll of toilet paper? You know, all these different perspectives would give you some sort of version of the truth or some explanation as to why those things might happen. So it's important to get a sense of all those perspectives. So you're better placed for that as well. I do talk a little bit. So psychology originally came out of philosophy. So there's a lot of philosophical questions in psychology. As I said, so I won't go through all these. You can listen to these and look at the slides. The cross-cultural psychology, I will say, is something that's quite important now. You know, do all people react in the same way across all cultures? Most of psychology was originally in Europe, but then in the US is very Western based. So there's a lot of Western cultural influences on our psychology. So more and more, a lot of the stuff that we've done over the years, we're going back and saying, well, is that different for different cultures? Can culture influence some of these psychological theories and processes that we've examined? So that's another really nice positive way we're going. Probably the most famous philosophical debate in psychology is what we call the nature-nurture debate. Yeah. So yeah, that,
really,
as I said,
part.
that person that, you know, that person, Josh, that you tracked down, were they born that way? Is that a genetic thing? They just, you know, had the genes for rudeness, so to speak? Or is that something maybe they learnt, you know, through childhood, parental influences, peer influences, that they actually became sort of a rude person over time? That's a really, really important one. this nature nurture, you know, is it the behavioral theorists would say, oh yeah, it's all about nurture. The biological perspective and the evolutionary perspective was more about, well, it's probably a genetic link as well. This is something that's really important. When we talk about mental health, it's the same thing. You know, what causes people to have psychological mental health issues, psychological disorders? You know, is that something there's a genetic link? And in fact, there's a pretty strong link to that, much more so than when I was sitting where you were, because there's a lot of genome research now. But does that mean that it's just purely genetic, that there's no environmental influences? No. So we'll talk about what we call this diathesis stress hypothesis. There is a genetic, there's a heritability component that is important to a lot of our psychology, but there needs to be, it's also interacts with the environment, you know. And in fact, there's some really cool genomic research, I wish I had some time to go into, where they look at, you know, environmental factors now can actually, we used to think a gene was expressed or not, but environmental factors can actually switch genes on and off, you know.
Yeah, is it like gene environmental correlation?
Yeah. So we'll talk about, particularly when it comes to week 9, when we do psychological disorders, this diathesis stress thing. It's a really, really complex interaction between, you know, our biology, our genes, plus the environmental, our learning influences as well. All right, just quickly, and again, I haven't really got into chapter 2, so I'll probably have to leave that as a little bit of homework. From a scientific perspective, yeah, how do we actually acquire knowledge? How do we get an understanding? And you probably all do this as well. A lot of people just use anecdotal experience. Well, I know this, my brother's cousin's uncle, you know, he was this. So that might, you know, that goes against it. Remember, psychology, we're making generalizations. We're trying to understand large groups of people usually. There's always exceptions to that. So a lot of what we do is focus on some of the more specific stuff. Yeah. Is the earth flat? Well, it looks pretty flat to me. Does that necessarily mean if our experience of it, you know, is what the truth is? Definitely not. Common sense as well, you know, well, isn't it just common sense? A lot of times, you know, because somebody tells us this is the truth, we believe that as well. So there's lots of ways we acquire knowledge. Faith or belief, obviously, is another way. Again, and there's some research that says, you know, having religious beliefs, for example, is good for well-being. Hard to test scientifically, though, through hypothesis testing as well, a little bit as well. I want to look at that really quickly. So how many people think, oh yeah, most of psychology, and people say this, is just pretty common sense, it's pretty straightforward? Who thinks that? Maybe. I'm going to test you. So I did this yesterday. I'll see how you go compared to yesterday. So if you want to jump on, I'll jump out of this a little bit as well. Jump on Kahoot. We'll do it through Kahoot. And if anyone doesn't remember, oh, where is it? I'll throw the link back up in the chat again. So if you go to just Google Kahoot, it comes up as the first thing. Oh, hang on, I've got the wrong thing. Hopefully this will still work. Can you still see that Kahoot screen?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, all right. So yeah, the pin for this one. So this is a little true or false. So nice and simple. I've got a couple of questions for you. All I want to know is true or false. So 5, can you see that? 551 5342. Where's our music gone? I can't find my music. Is that a paid extra now? my music's not working.
That was actually the best part about Kahoot, just so you know.
Yeah, and there's like
Yeah, you're right.
there's new music. There's like reggae and stuff now. Funk. Oh, why do I not have music? I don't have a registered account. Surely you don't have to pay for music now, do you? You don't have to be a member. Anyone else need more time to log on? All right. Oh, someone just snuck in. Sorry, if you don't, just call out your answers maybe. All right, quick true or false. Change the way people act, you must first change their attitudes. Oh, not so good for a start. Has anyone actually behaved in a way that's inconsistent with their attitudes? Done something maybe they regretted? Something that you could maybe say, oh, maybe I was a little bit hypocritical? Yeah, so sometimes we do things completely against what our beliefs, our attitudes are. We also know in psychology that it works the other way around. Sometimes you don't have to change somebody's attitude. If you change your behavior, that can actually influence your attitude as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think.
Yeah, and we do this. This is all these little questions, these true false. We're actually going to cover some of these at some stage this trimester as well. Yeah. So you say if anyone said something like you've said something rude to somebody, you haven't been nice to somebody, and you go, oh, you know, oh, that's actually I'm not that sort of person. I'm a nice person. What do? You feel a bit, you know, uneasy because you know, you're a nice person, right? But you kind of haven't acted nicely. So what do you normally do? There's actually a couple of options. You could apologize to that person, right? And say, oh, I'm really sorry. I was a bit stressed. Didn't mean to upset you. Or sometimes maybe then change your behavior. You could actually change your attitudes. Well, they weren't that nice anyway, right? They probably deserved it. So you can actually change the way you do it. Psychology is really interesting that way. All right, we'll see how we go with the next one. The greater the reward promised for a boring activity, the more one will enjoy the activity. Yeah, so again, and by the way, there's a bit of grey area to this, so don't panic too much. This is something that you could argue a little bit, but yeah, we'll talk about motivation, what we talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Anyone get paid for grades at school? In a sense, we're doing rewarding you. So if you study, you do the things I say, then you'll get a high distinction rather than a distinction. Most of the time, rewards have some short-term impact. So if I said to you, you know, I'm going to give everyone $50 that shows up and turns their camera on next week's lecture, I may get an increase in behavior, but what it tends to happen is it actually diminishes your intrinsic motivation, your internal motivation. So yeah, paying kids for getting good grades might work for a short period of time, but in fact, it actually takes away some of the intrinsic reward for it. And if you stop paying somebody, you're probably they're less likely to enjoy something or want to continue doing it. So there's some really interesting social psychology in that as well. All right, what about this one? Most people rate themselves below average when comparing themselves to others in attractiveness. True or false? Oh, I got a couple more of this one. How many people go, no, that's not true. I don't do that. It's actually, yeah, there is scientific evidence for this. This comes first, that anecdotal versus scientific evidence. You know, I'm not the smartest person, but I'm probably a little bit more intelligent than most people. People have what we call this self-serving bias, where you tend to rate yourself on a lot of attributes as a little bit better than the average for it. It's a little bit of a psychological phenomenon. It doesn't mean that that's the same for everyone. We're talking about generalizing across big groups of people for this one as well. Most people disobey a person in authority who orders them to hurt a stranger. Yeah, unfortunately, this one is false. You know, who would be in a category that they would think, I'm not gonna physically harm somebody and hurt somebody just because somebody tells me to? Who would put themselves in that category? Yeah, unfortunately, and then we're going to talk about some positive and some dark sides of human psychology. Studies, if anyone's heard of it, you can look it up. We're going to talk about it later in the course. The Milgram experiments by research called Stanley Milgram in the 70s. He was looking at, you know, World War II atrocities in Nazi Germany. You know, why would people follow orders and, you know, be contributing to people's deaths? He did an experiment on that. As it turns out, the majority of people, you say, oh, that wouldn't be me. 2/3 of us would do, you know, some serious harm to somebody else just because somebody in authority figure tells us to do it. It's one of the interesting, but yeah, downsides of our psychology. And we will explore some of that a little bit later too. In debate, it's always to your advantage to be the last speaker. Yeah, so this one, again, you can argue with this a little bit. This is probably a bit more of the grayer ones of the questions, but if you go first, you can frame the debate. You can sort of set the stage that someone then has to counter your arguments. I won't get into too much on this one. But there is some evidence for that in psychology, that going first is actually better, where most people think going last. People pull harder in a tug of war when in a team than when pulling by themselves. Yeah, for this one, common sense, you would think, oh, if you're part of a team, that would motivate you more. The research actually says otherwise, that we tend to, is what's called diffusion of responsibility, or social loafing is the colloquial term, that sometimes people slack off. Who's doing group projects this trimester for other courses? I don't have any group projects. This will be something we'll talk about later on that may be relevant. You know, why people, there's always someone that slacks off in a group. If you can't see anyone that's probably slacking off in the group, maybe that's because it's you. People are less likely to help another person if they're alone than if there's a group around. Yeah, this one here, unfortunately, this is another one too. If you're in distress, you're in need of assistance, you would think if you're in a situation where there's lots of people around to help you, you're more likely to get help. But as it turns out, due to something called the bystander effect, in fact, you're less likely that people will help you. If there's only one other person around, you're actually more likely to get help than if there's a big group of people around and you need help. Again, a bit of a counterintuitive one, but that's something we're going to have a look at later on as well. All right, we're doing much better now. Groups will generally make more moderate decisions than a single individual will.
You swap the answers around, you tricky bugger.
This is normally in class, I start hearing moans from people for some reason. It's interesting, there was 7 people saying false again. Anyone got some psychological explanations there? Who sort of saw a pattern that the answers are all false? Yeah, how many people did I get for that one?
7.
Got a few people. Yeah, I upset people with that. As I said, that's again a good example, right? We're creatures of habit. We predictability as well. So yeah, that's still false. Yeah, and in fact, you would think that too. If you've got a group of people, you've got different viewpoints, you get a more moderate decision. But in fact, what happens is we have these processes called group polarization, group think, where sometimes the group will actually make worse decisions, which is why you see sometimes political groups, make decisions that people from the outside would go, how could you possibly think that's a great idea? But when you get a group, and sometimes really good groups and cohesive groups actually make really poor decisions for those reasons as well. Nice, simple one. Opposites attract. This is all split down the middle. This is a nice example of that notion. As I said, like, isn't it just common sense? If I put up something that said birds of a feather flock together, yeah, it's the opposite thing, but both of those things fit. And that's one of the problems. And that's something we're going to talk about, particularly in terms of using psychology from a scientific perspective. Just because an explanation makes sense to you and you go, yeah, that kind of explains it, that makes sense. Yeah, opposites. I know people, that are pretty different personalities that get on together. Doesn't mean that's necessarily true. So again, we need to understand a little bit more scientifically those. I've got another quick one just like this one as well. Does absence make the heart grow fonder? And yes, I did swap the true and false around again, just to see if that previous experience had any influence on your current experience. Who picked it up this time? Or who went back and there you go, there's learning. Yeah, again, the research suggests that absence tends to make the heart wander rather than grow fonder. Again, so it's one of those ones, as I said, it doesn't necessarily mean this is where we're applying to large groups of people. As I said, I've got a bag of lollies here, but I don't know how I get them to you. We get on campus maybe as well. Josh, Ali, T. Good job. I'll make a note of those. We're going to get some sort of reward system maybe. Oh, sorry. Where are we? All right. I'll give you the results of that. How many people did well on that? How many people think they passed that common sense test? Don't worry too much about it. I'll talk about that next week, actually. All right. So just quickly. Now we're sort of running short on time. So this is probably a little bit of homework, but the classes next week, I'll spend more time on this. As I said, remember the learning experiences, we will do a lecture review. So what I do want you to do for next week is watch the lecture and look at the slides and maybe read a little bit of some chapter 2 and chapter 9 on measurement and intelligence. And we'll do a little lecture review on it. But the rest of the class next week, we're going to come back and focus on what's in the slides for the bit that I'm about to show you, which is our, where are we? All right, you're back on my slides? Yeah, which is our psychology. So that was all sort of chapter 1. Chapter 2 is what I want to focus on a little bit more. So yeah, this is the start of chapter 2. So how do we do a psychology in a scientific way? What's the best way to acquire knowledge in psychology? 2 key components: empirical evidence. We need to be able to scientifically measure But the other thing is, and this is a really important one as well, is this notion of skepticism. And skepticism is not just, oh, I don't believe anything I see, I don't trust anything. Skepticism is a little bit more about being willing to change your conclusions, your theories in the face of evidence, you know, not just accepting something at face value without any scientific evidence as well. So these are some pretty important processes as well. Yeah. So empiricism, yeah, we can experience, we can measure things, we can understand things. Psychology, as we'll talk about next week when we measure it, is tricky. Some things in the physical sciences, it's very easy to measure, but in psychology, it gets a little bit trickier, and I'll spend a little bit of time on that, and you'll see that in the lecture next week. But as I said, yeah, falsifiability is one of the key processes in science. So yeah, we can say, well, yeah, the evidence supports our understanding, our explanation, our theory. And we're going to talk about theories and hypotheses a little bit more in next week's classes, but I've got to be willing to be able to try and, you know, prove my theory wrong. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So if you're focusing on this, can you see that slide? This scientific method is really, really important, and it matches in, and it's a more sort of in-depth version of that goals we talked about: description, explanation, and prediction. You know, so yeah, we have a question, we observe something, we describe something, and we say, oh, that's interesting that this happens. Then we look at the explanation, the understanding, and we'll come up with some sort of theory maybe that might explain that. And then how we test our theory is through what we call hypotheses. Well, if that theory is correct, we could predict, we could hypothesize that, you know, this will happen or this will happen. So this is a really, really important bit, as we said. If we find support, we don't then go, ah, yes, our theory must be true. But we know that there's more support for it. But where the important bit is if our results don't match up, our predictions aren't supported, then, well, maybe there's something wrong with the theory. Maybe we need to refine our theory. Maybe we need to throw it out completely and start with a new theory as well. But it's got to be objective. It's got to be unbiased. I think I always say, I probably said in the lecture, science is fantastic, and it would work so well if people didn't get involved in it. Yeah, the problem with science is that human beings do it, and human beings aren't good at following along scientific principles, right? And you can explain that, right? I've got this psychological theory. I've been working my whole career on this theory. Someone gets a nice, neat, simple experiment that disproves my theory. What do? I go, oh, well, I've got to do something else now. My theory's wrong that I've been working on for 20 years. Humans aren't good at doing that, right? We hang on to biases and beliefs. Yeah, so as I said, but we want to try and be as objective and scientific as possible. So here's some stuff. As I said, I'm not going to go over this in detail now, but watch the lecture, read chapter 2, or even if you want to go back, there's a nice, as I said, that nice little crash course psychology with, I think, Hank. There's identical twins that do the crash course stuff. I think it's Hank that does the psychology one. He's got a nice little 10-minute lecture on research methods that go through some of these important things with a nice visual way. Yeah, if we want to measure something in psychology objectively, we've got to actually turn it into a variable. Yeah, I might want to say, well, my goal is for you to be successful in this course. Well, great, but what's success? How do I define it? How do I measure it? How do I objectively know what success is in the course? Well, I can do lots of things, right, to try and measure it. Some scientific, some non-scientific. You know, success is whether you believe that, yep, I got something out of this course, or no, I didn't. You know, I might measure success in your actual percentage grade at the end of the trimester, whether you got 73%, whether you got 58%. There's lots of ways that we measure things, but when we talk about variables in science, it's a way of trying to measure. And again, we're going to emphasize this a little bit more next week, but definitely read up on this because it does get a little bit tricky. Variables. And again, this links into our 5% assignment is identifying variables, but also in our 30% assignment, this is important as well. Hypotheses. So I will ask you, I can tell you this straight away in the mid-trimester exam, I'll ask you things about differences between hypotheses and theories. theories in science are something that are probably misunderstood. Yeah. Theories and hypotheses get confused. People think theories, oh, it's just theories, it's a belief. But a theory is basically a whole set of concepts that explain it. So some theories are very, very strongly supported by evidence, you know, enough that we could basically say they're, you know, they're factual. Some theories aren't supported as much by evidence, can be weaker, but the fact that it's a theory doesn't mean it could, you know, it could be true or false. Some theories we pretty definitively know are true. Some, you know, maybe we don't. But hypotheses are more about, you know, our predictions, our beliefs as well. So kind of theories are broad explanations and understandings about what happens. Hypotheses are, okay, well, if that theory is correct, I need to test that theory empirically. Hypotheses are specific predictions from that theory that we can actually try to test that theory with. So again, read up on your hypotheses and theories as well. The other important thing, and again, we're going to do some practice on this next week, is how do we actually scientifically test some of these things? We break some of the designs that we look at into what we call experimental designs. And a lot of people think about this. Experiments are great because they can actually allow cause and effect. And the other thing to learn about, and we're going to do spend some time on this, as I said later on too, is when we talk about things that vary, we talk about what might be the causal factors, what might be the effects. So we break variables down to what we call an independent variable, which is usually the one we're interested in comparing, manipulating as well. And the dependent variable, which is kind of the consequence, the outcome. We call it dependent because we think maybe that variable will depend on what you do on the independent one. Yeah, so I might be interested in, is actually showing up to these classes any good? Is that going to help you succeed in this course? So yeah, the independent variable, what I might want to do is to say, okay, well, I want to compare people that do attend these learning experiences for 3 hours and the people that are enrolled in the course that don't show up. So that's my independent variable that I've looked at. My dependent variable is, well, how do I measure those differences? So yeah, I might look at how you go on the mid-semester exam as a mark. So I might have a measure of, you know, an outcome measure as well. Again, this is just a brief view. So this is something, as I said, that I want you to look at before. To do an experiment though, the key thing is I have to be able to, where are we? Randomly assign people. So there's what we call random assignment. And I've got an example. How much time have I got? I don't want to go through this in too much detail now. But in my example, if you go and watch it, yeah, to be able to run an experiment, I've actually got to be able to randomly assign people the conditions. Yeah. If I said, okay, I want to know the difference between people that do and don't show up to class, what I would have to do to run a true experiment is to say, okay, I'm going to get everyone enrolled in the course. I'm going to randomly assign people to 2 groups. Half the people, I'm going to say, you have to show up to these learning experiences. The other half, I say, don't log on. I don't want to see you. Then I can measure it, because the problem is by random assignment, what I can do is there might be individual differences in people's abilities, but by randomly assigning it, I can basically make sure that those things don't influence it. If it's not an experiment, and can I say that, okay, you don't show up to class, it's probably not ethically available. So does that mean I can't study it scientifically? No, but what it becomes is what we call a quasi-experiment, which is basically like an experiment, but I can't randomly assign people to conditions. So in other words, I can't manipulate and say, oh, you show up to class, you don't show up to class. But what I can do is say, well, half the people are showing up, half the people aren't. Let's compare the people that are showing up to class and not showing up to class to see if there's a difference in their exam mark in the mid-semester. The big problem with that is if the people that don't show up to class do worse in the exam, I don't know for sure that showing up to class was the true cause, because when I can't manipulate that independent variable and randomly assign, maybe there's what we call a confounding variable, or another variable might explain that. You know, is there something else about if people don't show up to class, what might that indicate? You're all psychologists, right? We're going to encourage people, hopefully, to contribute. Anyone want to? Anyone got any attributions? People don't show up to class. Could there be any factors associated with that?
Life responsibilities.
Yeah, so maybe they're working full time. They're so busy with other sorts of things.
Yeah.
They don't show up to class. You know, maybe they're just got no motivation. Maybe they're slack. So
They could be
maybe
sick.
it's not really just coming to class that's making them do well in the exam. Maybe they're not doing as well in the exam if they don't show up is because they're so busy, then they don't have time to do any of the other sorts of study. There might be people that, you know, that don't show up to class, but they still do lots of study and do really well. So those extra factors, if we can't randomly assign, we can do it. So yes, some people might be busy, but if I randomly assign that in an experiment, yes, there's people that have really, really busy lives, people have less busy, but they should be equally spread because I've randomly assigned those people. So people that are busy with other things, that shouldn't be a variable that could influence my results, if that makes sense, because I've manipulated it. Read up on that, watch the crash course, but there's a lot of stuff on that as well. There's a third type of design rather than experimental and quasi-experimental, and it's what our 30% assignment's based on. Sometimes I can't really manipulate anything. I can't compare groups. All I can do is just measure things. Yeah. If I do that, what I end up with is what we call correlational research. So correlational research is about just measuring variables and looking at patterns, looking at relationships between those variables. Yeah. So what I might do is I just measure how many classes you show up to, how many hours of these learning experiences you attend. So everyone could, you know, attend between 0 and 36 hours across the trimester. Yeah. Then I could measure that, but I could also get your final exam mark and measure how you go. And I could then look at what we call correlations or patterns between those two variables. Yeah. So in other words, I could say, well, it seems to be that the people that show up a lot tend to do better on the exam. People that don't show up much tend to do worse on the exam. I don't know for sure what the cause of that is, but I do know there's a relationship there that's predictive, if that makes sense. And I've got a few examples if you go back and watch the lecture capture on that. Correlational research is done quite a lot in psychology because a lot of things we can't manipulate. We can't assign conditions like an experiment. But the problem with correlations is they don't necessarily allow us to do cause and effect. And we'll focus on this a little bit next week, but I'd like you to read up on the statistical side in chapter 2. We actually describe relationships as either positive or negative. So positive correlations. So if I'm plotting attendance in class on my x-axis on the bottom line here, and my y-axis, I'm plotting the exam mark. Yeah, a positive, where all the dots sort of go in a pattern from bottom left to top right, sort of mean, yeah, low attendance goes with low exam mark, high attendance goes with high exam mark. Sometimes relationships are negative and they actually go in opposite directions. So maybe instead of attendance, I might measure anxiety and exam performance. So I can say, well, the people that have high anxiety on this x-axis on the bottom here tend to do worse on the exam. People that have low anxiety tend to do better. So do know your positive, negative correlations. And yeah, I will ask you something about that as well. Yeah. The other thing that I'll do, and we're going to do this in class next week, is I've got a little 6-step scientific method about, okay, what's a research question, something you're interested in? Let's get a hypothesis that's testable from that. How do we design a study? Can we do an experiment, a quasi-experiment, or a correlation? And then conduct the study as well. So the example, if you go back through and listen to the lecture, is the research question is laptops good for note taking? So is it better to take notes on a laptop or is it better to use a pen and paper to take notes? Yeah, so I go through a nice little example of how we set up variables, how we manipulate variables, etc. for that one as well. Have a look at that, but what we'll do in next week's class, and if anyone wants to volunteer, if someone's got a research question, anyone off the top of their head have a research question they're interested in? At all? Anything you've been interested in?
Sorry, is this for the 30% assessment? Is that?
Oh, no, just generally speaking.
Oh, okay, good.
Has anyone wondered anything? Is there any, is something better than something else? Is there a relationship between things? Yeah. Have a think about it. We'll go through an example together next week. So hopefully it's something that someone else wants to look at. Yeah. Good. So yeah, chapter 2, I haven't covered a lot today, but that's probably what I'm going to focus on a little bit more in class next week, is going back over, because that's some pretty fundamental stuff, particularly for our assignments. And as I said, after next week's class, hopefully you'll then be able to start that first 5% assignment and go, okay, I kind of know what an independent variable is and a dependent variable, what the hypotheses are, et cetera, et cetera. So we're trying to scaffold your learning up a little bit for that. Any other questions, comments? We okay? Survived? This is the bit where I hate being online. There's a couple of people who got cameras on, but most people are. I've just got these names, so I can't. It's really hard to get feedback and reactions. Please, please, please. I'd love to hear feedback from you. What you like, what you don't like, what's working, what's not working. But as I said, we'll finish up. So, do you know what you're doing for next week? If you haven't gone back and look at that learning content, watch the lecture from last week, maybe have a look at that, and then do a bit of prep, maybe look at the, as I said, if you want to have a crack at the quiz this week, and then have another go at it next week after we do a little bit more on some of those things as well. The quizzes are great. Remember, you can sit them as many times as you want. And if you want to kind of get a sense, oh, there's lots of content here. Do I know what I'm supposed to know? Crack the 20-question quiz out. Have a go at it, and if you don't do well, don't panic or anything like that. It's not a big deal, as I said, but it'll give you a bit of feedback about, okay, I need to look at a few of these things. And as I said, I'm going to look at the quizzes and see how you go on it as well. But if you don't, then obviously the learning content for next week is the other bit to have a look at. So watch the next lecture on measurement and intelligence. Have a look at the slides, maybe have a look at the crash course if you want to have a quick look at that. Get a sense of that. And so next week we'll come in, we'll do a lecture review. I'll talk about what the key things to focus on are, particularly for the exams. And then, as I said, we're going to spend a bit of time on hypotheses and variables and things like that next week, just to make sure you're okay with that. Otherwise, I've got a class at 1:30, but I'm happy to hang around and have a chat. If anyone's got any issues, anything you want to talk about, more than welcome to. But otherwise, thank you. Nice to meet you all. Hopefully I'll get to know you a little bit better. Have you been doing icebreakers in the other courses this week? I probably should be doing icebreakers and things like that, but I will do some stuff. I'll get you into groups for some of the time in these learning experiences, just so you can have a chat to each other. I think that's a really, really important thing as well. So hopefully we'll encourage a bit of a culture where you'll start to feel a little bit more comfortable speaking in class, or if not, we'll get into some small groups and have some chats to each other in smaller groups that hopefully you'll feel a bit more comfortable with. But as I said, any questions, any concerns, anything you worry about, email me, jump on. Oh, Tony's fine, Steve. Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Hurd sounds, yeah. Yeah, Tony is absolutely fine. As I said, you've got my number. Have a chat to me anytime. But otherwise, have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you next week. Like I said, I'm going to hang around if anyone wants to have a chat.
Tony?
Yes.
Can I just ask, so for the
Darina?
next... Yeah, Darina.
Darina.
Yeah. So for the next lecture, in order to be prepared, we have to rewatch the first lecture if you haven't watched it yet.
If you haven't, yeah. So it's the learning content in those weekly tiles is what's expected that you've had a look at before you come to class next week. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let's say in my case, I haven't watched the lecture 1 yet. So